Let's go ahead and call our meeting to order. Make the motion to set the agenda.
Better gavel them one
Better
more
gavel
time.
it again.
Hit it really hard.
All right.
I'll make a motion to set the agenda.
Is there a second? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Agenda's set. Okay. Jim, you want to do the invocation and Martha pledge?
Are we doing the
get to
consent
that?
agenda first?
Can we get to that?
Let's do the consent agenda first. Yeah, that's a good idea. Good idea.
Thank you, Mayor and Council.
Breeze through this.
So before we begin, we'll go over the mission statement as we do every month. That the City of Belmont provides visionary leadership and high-quality city services to create a community of choice for our residents, visitors, and employees. And our vision statement is that Belmont will be a vibrant, multi-generational community that incorporates small-town charm and heritage with an entrepreneurial spirit. So I'll briefly go over I think we have 9 items on the consent agenda. The first 3 are minutes from your previous meetings. You had the minutes from the planning retreat in January, and then your March 7th regular meeting and your March 21st workshop. Also, as we've done for many years now, you have a resolution proclaiming Arbor Day in Belmont, and this year will be April the 30th, and that will coincide with our Arbor Day celebration here at Baltimore Fest. And then you have several items that are related to special events coming up this year. You have approval of an ordinance to authorize the closing of several streets downtown for the annual Walk for AIDS that the House of Mercy puts on. That'll be done on September the 17th.
Years, yeah.
And then you previously approved an ordinance to allow for alcohol sales, possession, and consumption for the Friday Night Live concert. Staff would like to request that you amend that for the one concert on April the 29th to allow for the stage for that concert to be set at the upper part of Stowe Park at the walking track. That's where the stage will be set for the next day's Garibaldi Fest. And so it will be a lot easier to have both events in the same location. And we want to test this out. And we would still have the street if available if for some reason the upper park was muddy from a rainstorm or something like that. So want to need approval for that. Also, you have acceptance of the streets or some of the streets in the Laurel Walk neighborhood. These have been built to our city standards and inspected by the city inspectors and approved by the city engineer. So we recommend we accept those for ownership and maintenance. And we don't get this very often, but we are requesting that you declare one of our canines in the police department as surplus property. And even though he's a dog, he's still legally considered city property. So you have to declare him surplus as you do vehicles and equipment that have gone past their useful span. In the memo from the police department, you see that he's had some health issues, and so he's no longer as valuable to us as a canine. So we do want to declare him a surplus and allow his handler to take him home as a pet. So we do have authority in the general statutes to allow for canine officers to receive their canines once they're declared surplus. And then you have consideration of a resolution accepting a proposal from the Jonas Group for a 1-year lease of office space at the old planning department building at 37 North Main Street. You approved this a year ago. They've made renovations to that building and have enjoyed being down there. And we certainly don't have any other use for that building over the next year.
Yeah.
So we recommend approval of that.
Okay.
Also, I handed out the code enforcement update, so you've got that just for your information. So that's all that I have for the consent agenda, and I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have.
On the concert amendment to the for the 29th.
Yes, sir.
And the ordinance, so I take it that if the field is muddy and we'd still have the street, so that's why even though we want to amend it to include the stage on the upper field, we're still contemplating closing the streets. If the stage is in fact able to be set up on the upper field, the streets would not be closed then?
Is that correct, Morgan? Yes.
Okay.
So in this particular case, we would keep the street open and have the preference would be to keep the street open and have the concert on that upper field.
Right.
Yeah.
Assuming
Weather
that field-
cooperating.
Correct.
And do we need to amend the ordinance for the performance of live music then in Stowe Park? Because right now it just says performance of live music like on Main Street.
Yes, that would be safer. Thank you.
You're welcome. Very good. On the lease for the Jonas group is $1,500 the market rate.
Yes, sir.
Okay. And they were making some renovations to the building, correct?
They did that last year.
Okay.
Yes.
What were they? I mean,
They completely changed. Well, they renovated the inside, new flooring. Phil, you remember all what they did? If you walk into it, you won't recognize it. It's got Denise's touch to it now.
okay.
As far as determining the rate for that, I just poked around on LoopNet to see what kind of the rates were for other properties currently available downtown. I found one for $24 and one for $25 a square foot per year. And the way we've got this priced, it works out to about $16 a square foot. I didn't spend a whole lot of time looking into this, but that was enough of a difference for me to kind of want to ask a question about it.
Do you remember how we came up with that last year? I know we did comps when we did this last year.
How long ago was that?
A year ago. So, I mean, if you want to change
I mean, would it make sense, because I know we've got a lease with them and a lease with the chamber, and I know it's not unusual to escalate on renewal, not like necessarily a lot, but I would think that some percentage that's reasonable, just so that it doesn't fall too far behind what the market is. Because I wouldn't want our properties downtown to act as a drag on the other properties we've got downtown, or the other landlords that have properties downtown. So,
sure.
That would be
What amount would you like me to take back to them?
Well, I mean, if we are substantially below market value, I mean, we should be at least at market value, should we not?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you're gonna price it at $24 a square foot, that would be $2,200 a month. But that is substantially more than what we are currently charging them. But I mean, I would think we'd want to take something.
Well, I mean, I think we have a responsibility to get what we can out of that asset. I mean, we're not wanting to exceed market value, or just want to equal market value.
I think we should take into consideration what they put into the renovation though as well, because it was certainly not market ready for office space. That the building, the interior of the building was not anything that most people want to rent. You're going to have to do some major work. I've not seen it, but I'm assuming it costs them a reasonable amount. So if we're going to do that, I think we need to go back and find out how much they spent to renovate and take that into consideration when we look at what we're doing for this next year. Then the year after that, if they still want it, I think it should be definitely right at market rate.
Yeah, I agree with that, because again, that's a benefit to us as a city with the investment that they put into that. But again, another thing here, I see that they're also going to be paying for all the utilities. With the rates that you look online, I don't know how they rent or the leasing structure is downtown, but do we know if the landlords are currently covering utilities, or is that passed on to the
I didn't look
tenants?
into that specifically, but
Some would and some would not.
I mean, I can
Because
tell
that
you-
would also
yeah.
fluctuate it by a couple $100 here and there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I can tell you the lease I've got, I pay utilities, and I'm also responsible for the HVAC, which I'd rather not talk about at the moment. But I mean, that's not in Belmont, but I know stuff like that's not unusual for commercial leases either. So
If you would like for us to do a little bit more research on what the current market rate is, we can certainly do that and bring it back to you next month, as long as we can just continue.
Or even at the workshop for that matter.
Yeah, could we
that's
also
fine.
potentially quantify what they invested in the building as well?
Yes.
For the upfit? Thanks.
Well, let me ask you this, and just play devil's advocate. If I rent somebody's house, I've agreed to rent the house for X amount of dollars. If I decide that I want to upgrade something in the house, the fixtures or whatever, I'm doing that on my own volition, knowing that it is not my property.
I think it was in the agreement, though, that
Was
they would be doing that.
Yes, so we deferred 6 months of rent last year in exchange for the renovations. Now, I don't know that all the total cost, but my understanding was the amount that they invested in that building exceeded 6 months worth of rent.
Yeah.
So we clearly had the better end of that deal.
That's right.
Because those improvements stay with the building.
Right. You'd otherwise be right, but you can, of course, put it in the contract, which is what they did. So,
Yeah, and sometimes you'll even have like allowances explicitly written into the lease. You know, you get $20,000 or $30,000 worth of outfits and whatever at our cost. But we didn't do it that way. But so it's not unusual for there to be some sort of co-investment in the space.
So then I think that is the consensus that you go, you do further research into the market rate as well as the value of the improvements that have been made, and sort of so that we can better determine what the rate will be for this upcoming year.
Okay, absolutely.
Okay.
And I'll bring that to one of our upcoming workshop meetings if possible. If not, it'll be the May meeting. So then we'll just, when you go to approve the consent agenda, just take this off and defer it to a future.
And amend the ordinance for the
Okay.
live music in
Yes.
Stowe Park.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's all that I have for the work
Great.
session. So
All right.
you can move into the
Regular
invocation
meeting.
now. Yes, sir.
All right, let's set the, Jim, you want to do the invocation? Martha, the pledge?
Right.
Okay.
Let us pray. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the blessings you have bestowed on us. We ask for your guidance and wisdom in resolving the issues before us today, that we listen to each other and take actions in the best interest of the city. We remember our former mayor, Billy Joy, who passed away this past week, and we pray for him and for his family, and remember the service that he gave to this community. And we ask all these things in your name. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America,
To
and
the
to the
republic
for which it stands,
one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. Anybody want to make a motion?
Charlie, call me.
Hmm?
Go ahead and call it.
I'm sorry. Yeah. Going to call the meeting to order?
So,
Make a-
right, we've already made a motion to set the agenda.
We did.
And so I would make a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented, with the exception of a further amendment to item 6 on the ordinance for the Friday Night Live concert on April 29th to include the performance of live music in Stowe Park, and the removal, or the tabling of item number 9, the Jonas Group lease, to a future meeting.
Second.
Okay.
All those in favor?
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? All right. Consent agenda carries. Regular agenda, public comment. We have one person signed up for public comment, Elizabeth Atterbury.
I'm not here to grumble tonight. I'm Elizabeth Atterbury, for you people that don't know me. 403 North Main Street. Couple of announcements. The Belmont Historical Society has reopened for visitors. We're open Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 1:30 to 4. Hope everyone will come down. We have a wonderful Belmont Police memorabilia exhibit. We had an open house with a lot of people there in October. People loved it so much, and we were closed because of COVID, so we just left it in for a while. And he's real glad that he don't have to take it out. So come by and see us. Now, April 30th we are having our annual Living History Day from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. And it will be on the grounds. And we will have different exhibitors there, maybe some hot dogs. So just come on by, free popcorn. So just come on by and visit with us, 10 to 1. In conjunction with that, even though I'm not on KBB board anymore, Keep Belmont Beautiful is having their annual plant sale. Myself and Judy Clausen have forms if anyone would like any of our beautiful hanging baskets. And it's a fundraiser for Keep Belmont Beautiful. The deadline is this coming Saturday. So if you're interested, see she or I. And you will pick those up on April 30th at the Belmont Historical Society. We sort of work in conjunction with them. The next announcement I have, this year, early voting. As you know, most of you know, I'm involved with the election. Early voting begins April 28th through May 14th. This year, for the May 17th primary, our early voting site will not be in Mount Holly. It will be at our own Gaston College Kimball campus. So let that word be out. And they will be open on Saturday, a couple of Saturdays and one Sunday, maybe 3 Saturdays and one Sunday. So go online, read all about that. And the main primary, go to your appropriate precinct if you don't early vote, and it's May 17th. Any questions? Okay. Hey, I didn't get to read.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
And Mayor, I believe the gentleman in the back wanted to speak. Did you sign up? There are several, so you may have signed the wrong form. Come on up if you'd like to, if that's okay.
Is he going to speak to one of the public hearing matters?
I think a public comment. Public comment. You just have a general comment, or do you want to talk about one of our zoning public hearings? Sure.
All right, state your name, address, and you have 3 minutes.
My wife signed up after me, so she
Sure.
agreed to yield the time.
Okay.
Yeah, my name is James Stagger, and I live at 125 Dory Drive in Belmont. I've lived here since 2007 with my wife and 3 children. Approximately 2.5 months ago, I was approached by a developer, Travis Manning, developing River Mist subdivision off of Stowe Road, I believe. And he came to my house and said, "Hey, I need to dig up your driveway because I got to tie in a water pipe for a development I'm building." I said, "Well, that's my brand new driveway. I just poured it. Let's go outside and talk about it." So went outside. He showed me what he wanted to do. And I said, "I just poured this driveway. It cost me a lot of money. I don't like the idea of you coming up and destroying my driveway." And he kept invoking the city's name. Well, the city this, the city that. So I said, "Look, when it's all said and done, are you going to put my driveway back?" And he said, "No." And I said, "Yeah, I don't think so. So you're not to come back to my property." And he kept saying, "Well, the city this, the city that." I said, "Look, here's my email. Have the city contact me. If the city wants to come dig up my property to tie into a water line, let the city come discuss this with me." Didn't hear back from him. That was about 2.5 months ago. About 10 days ago, I get an email from this gentleman. He said, "Hey, give me a call at your convenience." I don't think so. So I didn't call him back. So Wednesday night, about 9:30, under the cover of darkness, heavy equipment comes rolling in across from my house. I have no trespassing signs in my yard, legally displayed with the North Carolina law. So knowing that they were going to do this without working with me, I parked my vehicle on my property where I thought they were going to dig. Next morning, sure enough, they're at the house 7:15. I go out there. I asked the gentleman, "Who do you work for?" The gentleman says, "I work for the city of Belmont." Well, he actually didn't work for the city of Belmont. He was impersonating a city official. His name was Gene with Donaldson Grading Company out of Denver. And so I said, "Hey, there's no trespassing sign. Stay off my property." 8:30, police show up at the door. I explained to them a very long version of what I just told you. It said, hey, look, this is a civil matter. The city didn't contract it. The city's not doing the work. The city didn't contract the work. The city's never come talk to me about any of this. You're not tearing up my yard. You're not tearing up my driveway. It's a civil matter. If they want to dig, they need to get a court order. So then, skipping forward, I'm skipping a lot of details. Captain of police comes to my door and says, look, you don't remove your car off the property, I'm towing it. And I said, you do realize it's a legally owned car, private property. If you tow the car, it's larceny. So they call the tow truck driver, and I told the police, everybody here is to be trespassed. I don't want anybody on my property. They refused to enforce any trespass law. I said, I don't want the tow truck driver on my property. If he comes to my property, he's trespassing. Unless he's got a court order, he can't take a car that's legally owned on private property. So the tow truck driver shows up. I tell him, don't set foot on my property. Don't come on here, you're trespassing unless you have a court order. The tow truck driver gets out, comes about 18 feet up on my property. Police won't do anything. I have all this on CCTV, all conversations with the police reported.
Huh.
So when the captain was telling me all this before the tow truck came out, I said, where do you derive the authority to not enforce trespass law? Where do you derive the authority to tow a vehicle that's privately owned on private property? And his answer was city council. He said, because the city council voted for River Mist to be put in, that gives them the authority to do everything that we're doing. And so the tow truck driver came, tried to get the car, said he was going to damage it. So he left. He was going to get another vehicle to come back and get it. So I strategically kind of moved the vehicles around to block it in from the tow truck. So apparently left enough wiggle room for the contractors who weren't contracted by the city. They weren't city employees to then start digging my yard. So they start digging my yard. I told the police, trespassing. There's no trespassing sign. I've told them don't come to the yard. So not only did the police not enforce it, the contractors pulled my no trespassing sign, threw it on the ground, dug a hole in it. So at this point, I'm frustrated, confused, trying to understand why at 125 Dory Drive, the laws don't apply. How the city can try to take a vehicle that they don't own off of the property without a court order. So there's just a lot of questions that I have that I'm going to try to find the answers to. But I wanted to make you aware. Thank you.
Okay.
I know we don't engage, but we can direct. I mean, is there,
See, we can ask the city staff to look into the
Yes.
matter.
yes.
That's what we should
Yeah.
do.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Certainly.
If you would do that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Police officer right there with the file.
Okay. Thank you. All right. That concludes our public hearing. We got a public hearing on the culverts. Pardon me?
Public comment.
Public comment, yeah. On, that was public comment, yeah. But public hearing on the culverts.
Mayor,
Oh, yeah.
item number 2,
Is the tech works, we
tech work.
hold a
Oh,
hearing.
TechWorks, that's right, yeah.
So that's just a public hearing, like,
Yes.
Just a public hearing.
So
Motion to go into.
well, I move to go into public hearing.
I'll second.
Second, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
We are in public hearing for the,
thank you, Mayor and Council. You may recall, or some of you may recall, that the city was awarded a community development block grant, I believe in 2017, from the state for the TechWorks project. And that project has now been completed for the grant. And as part of that grant process, you have to hold a public hearing to allow for public comment on the grant project. So we've asked Steve Austin, who has been our CDBG consultant for this project, to come and briefly report out on the outcomes of this grant project and for you to accept any public comments. There is no action required from you other than holding the public hearing. Turn over to Steve. And of course, Terry Cox.
Members of the council, as Adrian said, in September 2017, the city was awarded $1,171 to renovate the building at 52 Irvin Street for TechWorks Gaston. This is Terry Cox, the executive director of that nonprofit, to renovate the building for use as a broadband computer literacy coding training facility. In April 2018, a contract was awarded for construction in the amount of $1,502,000. And these are numbers I have to say at this public hearing for the record. The City of Belmont gap financing was provided by the City of Belmont at $59,500. Gaston County provided $175,000. National Mills, who is the property owner, provided $166,000. TechWorks Gaston provided $104,329. The final construction cost was $1,518,817.43. Now, at the beginning of the grant, the state put a goal or a requirement on the city and TechWorks that minimum of 150 area school kids had to attend some kind of training at this facility. And everything was great. The project, the construction was ended in April 2019. It was a little late in the school year for them to make all the connections and everything, but in the fall they were geared up. Then in January, COVID hit. Everything kind of came to a grinding halt. The state's been very generous with grantees across the state as far as not pushing to allow everything to get more and more back to normal. 2 weeks ago, Friday, I got an email from Terry that they had indeed served and documented 164 people. So therefore, your goal has been met. As Adrian said, this is a federal requirement to hold a public hearing, close out this grant. There is no action required other than to answer any questions or take any comments.
Thank you all very much for your support. Really do appreciate it.
Thank you, Terry. Okay.
Did anyone sign up for that public hearing?
Did
If-
anybody sign up there?
What are we looking for?
Anybody on that
Public
public
hearing.
hearing?
For TechWorks?
Yeah, right here. There's nobody signed up.
I'll move to come out of public hearing.
Item number 2.
I'll
Item number
second.
3 there is, yeah. There you go, Parks.
Mark
Charlie.
moved to come out of public hearing. Martha seconded.
Yeah, so we're ready to vote out of public hearing. Charlie,
Okay.
all those in favor?
Next item on the
We
agenda.
got it, we
gotta
got to vote.
vote.
Charlie, we have to vote. This is
You've got a
all those in
motion and a
favor.
second to come out of the public hearing. So as soon as you vote to come out of it, then we can move to the next one.
Yeah, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, so we're at a public hearing. Let's go, next item is on the agenda is public hearing on culverts. And you have to forgive me, I'm in a lot of pain right now. I mean, a lot of pain from my back, just suffering. But anyway, public hearing on culverts, a request for special use permit to allow the establishment of a 4,340 square foot fast food restaurant located on Holy Avenue.
Move to go into public hearing.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, we're in public hearing. Go ahead.
Okay, I'll be handling this part of the agenda, this agenda item, and for the audience, or for city council, you're now, understand the SUP process. We've been through it several times. It's a quasi-judicial process for the audience, which means their normal function is a legislative body up here, but this is a separate type of proceeding called quasi-judicial, which will look more like something you might see in a courtroom environment, where you have sworn witnesses, testimony, cross-examination. Rules of evidence are not applied strictly. And we have direct testimony, cross-examination, and questions from the council in that order, followed by a closing comment and a vote that is where certain findings are required to be made. The findings are made by the city council, who sits as sort of a judge and jury in this process. So, and the last thing we had come up at the last one of these, this is a fact-based testimony process. So opinion testimony, mere opinion testimony is not going to be considered. So we're, the witnesses that'll be sworn, their testimony will be based on facts. So having said that, let me think about,
Don't you have questions for us?
I will just,
Okay.
I'm going to swear the witnesses
Okay.
first, and then we're going to process. I see the Taggarts signed up on this sheet by mistake, so we'll eliminate those two names.
Yeah.
Mr. and Ms. Taggart, and that leaves me, it looks like Mr. Russell will be representing the applicant, who is Southern Benedictine Society as the property owner and Culver's as the applicant. And they have 3 potential witnesses, but before they come forward, I'm going to first ask staff to come be sworn, and Ms. Ratchford is going to be presenting, and Mr. Hart, I want to have you sworn also.
Okay.
Place your left hand on the Bible, raise your right.
In parts, we have 3.
Okay. Okay.
That's okay.
Swear affirm the testimony you're about to give, the truth, the whole truth, truth. Thank you. John, Mr. Russell, you have 3 witnesses, Mr. Monroe, Mr. Palella,
Correct.
and a name I can't read.
Dimitri Dimitropoulos.
Okay, that's why I couldn't read. Left hand on the Bible, raise your right, gentlemen. You swear affirm the truth of the testimony you're about to give, the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Thank you very much. So, the city of Ratchford will be the first witness, and we're very, we've adopted a policy where, rather than ask questions on a direct examination, that presenter be allowed to give more of a narrative statement of the whole background, what's being requested, and at such time as she finishes, Mr. Russell, you'll be able to cross, and then the council will be able to ask questions. Prior to that, I need to direct several questions to the council that are conflict of interest questions, and one of which is a new one that's been added by 160D recently. But first of all, y'all are familiar with most of these. Do any of you have any financial or pecuniary interest in the outcome of this proceeding?
No.
No.
Okay. Now this is a new one. Do any of you have any family, business, or association, family, business relationship or association with the applicant?
No.
No.
And then is there any other reason why you can't render a fair and impartial decision based solely on the testimony that's going to be in the record tonight?
No.
Okay.
No.
All, having heard that in unanimous by the council, then we declare there's no conflicts and that we can proceed with the direct testimony unless you have any questions before we start.
No.
Okay, we good? Right.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. This is special use permit 2022.01. Can you hear me better? Okay. This is special use permit 2022.01 Culver's. I'm Peyton Ratchford. I'm the associate planner here with the city of Belmont. For the record, this is a request for a special use permit to authorize the establishment of a 4,300 square foot fast food restaurant, Culver's. The applicants are seeking approval for 2 reasons tonight. One of those is parking in the front yard and exceeding the minimum parking ratio by over 200%. The site location is currently 6 parcels diagonally across the street from the Park Street Chick-fil-A. Those parcel numbers are 214-364, 214-365, 214-366, 221-080, 221-081, and partial parcel 221-082. The owner of these properties are the Southern Benedictine Society. The applicant is BNC Land Company, LLC, and the attorney representing the applicants tonight is John H. Russell, Jr. So the site is currently undeveloped. The proposed site, it sits on about 2.47 acres. There is moderately steep topography along the southern portion of this property, and the site does sit along a curve, so it technically is considered to have two frontages. So one frontage along the northern property line, and the second frontage on the eastern property line. This is how kind of we would consider it to be a corner lot. So for background, according to Chapter 5.8.2.1 of the Land Development Code, a special use permit is required to approve parking in the front yard within this zoning district of highway commercial, provided that there is no other practical alternative for the location of such parking. Also, according to Chapter 9.2.1 of the LDC, a special use permit is required if the parking count exceeds 200% of the minimum parking ratio. So as I previously stated, this applicants are proposing a 4,300 square foot fast food restaurant with a drive-through, order waiting spaces, and an outdoor patio along the eastern side of the proposed building. The applicants are proposing parking on all four sides of the restaurant, including both of the front yards, which again would be on the northern property line and the eastern property line, which is again how we would consider the two front yards. The applicants are requesting this due to the normal business operations and allowing for staff parking, expected customers, and just for their normal business operations. Again, with parking, this is the second request of the evening. The required parking per our land development code is 36 spaces. We base this on our calculation of one parking space per 4 seats. That is how we calculate parking for restaurants. So the applicants are proposing over 200% of that requirement by proposing 77 spaces on site. These 77 spaces consist of 72 standard spots, 3 ADA parking spaces, and 2 order waiting. This exceeds the parking ratio, and again, same reason as previously, this is to accommodate the normal business operations and their anticipated users. This is an old slideshow. Don't have it. Okay.
Do you have a thumb drive?
Can we get a thumb drive?
I have a thumb drive.
Okay. Can we get his info? Sorry for this. This project did meet the threshold for a traffic study, so whenever that happens, we do have the city's traffic consultant to perform that. So I'm here as Brady Finkley with Kimberly Horn to discuss this study.
Thank you, Pete. Good evening, Mayor, Council. Brady Finkley, Kimberly Horn Associates, 200 South Trowland Street, Suite 200, Charlotte, North Carolina, 28202. As Peyton mentioned, because the site did warrant a traffic study per the city's ordinance, we were contracted with the city to perform the traffic study here. So I'm going to give a brief overview of the study and then hold questions, I think, till the end. We can dive into the details as requested. So I'd like to start off with just taking a step back and just talking about just reiterating the purpose of a development TIA or TTM, which is to evaluate the incremental impacts caused by a proposed development on the surrounding transportation system and to identify the mitigation improvements to offset those incremental impacts. It's consistent with the city and NCDOT mitigation requirements. And the purpose of saying that is it's not to correct existing deficiencies on there, but again, to identify their impact and to mitigate those. You may be wondering what a TTM is. So a TTM is for lack of a better word, an abbreviated version of a TIA or a traffic impact analysis. It stands for Transportation Technical Memorandum, and it is required by the city at discretion for a host of reasons. So whether or not it meets the needs for an NCDOT study or some of the thresholds that are in the city's policy, the city still has the ability to require some form of traffic study, and we call that a TTM. And so I believe that the site went to review by the planning board and with staff, and that a TTM was required for this. It did not meet NCDOT's warrants for a TIA, nor does it access an NCDOT street. So it's really just the city's call on this one. A few of the considerations that went into that was that of it being a TTM and not a full TIA, is that the existing zoning is highway commercial, so it's already set up for development that will be generating trips that are serving the local US 74, Park Street, and I-85 corridors. There are nearby funded improvements at a number of the intersections that are around there, including the I-85 interchange with the I-85 widening that's planned in a few years, as well as the Wilkinson and Park Street intersection. Both of those TIP projects are listed there. But one thing with the I-85 widening project is that, and for the other NESIP project, is that the long-range model, when it looks at traffic analyses, it takes into account the existing zoning. With the existing zoning being highway commercial, it's staying highway commercial, then that says that the TIP projects did take into account some kind of highway commercial, even though it's not there today. And then the last reason is that about half of the trip generation being what we call pass-by trips, and I'll get into that in just one moment. So this is the trip generation. The build-out year as provided by the applicant is 2022, so later this year. Trip generation for we assumed a little bit conservative, 4,400 square foot fast food restaurant with a drive-through. Looking at 2,000 daily trips those are raw driveway trips. And the important numbers to focus are the orange numbers. So the AM peak hour being 139 AM trips and the PM peak hour being 74 PM trips. Going back to what I mentioned earlier, which is pass-by. Pass-by are the trips that it's a trip credit, if you will, from the raw trip generation. The best way to think about trip pass-by are folks that would already be out on the street today. You think that they're, without the fast food restaurant there's already traffic going by there. You place a fast food restaurant, it's not bringing all these new trips to the area. There are a lot of folks that are just going to stop in on their way and then come back out and continue on their way home. And so for fast food restaurants per ITE, it's about 50% of that traffic. It's usually what we call pass-by trips. So all of those trips are not brand new trips that are brought to the study area, but they are important to note because they do impact the driveways, which we do analyze. And so the PM peak hour, we were able to take a full credit for that. The AM peak hour, getting into some of the weeds of it, is that it's capped by 10% adjacent street traffic. So it was capped. All that being said, the AM peak hour was analyzed based on a conservative number of trips, a higher number of trips than what would actually be generated most likely. This is the site plan using the TIA. Peyton already mentioned that, so we'll zoom in there in just a second. Here are the study intersections that were evaluated for the TTM. So you see the site right in the middle of the screen along Holly Avenue, south of 85 and west of Park Street. We looked at the Park Street intersection with Browntown and Holly Avenue connector. Moving on Park Street at the signal at Holly Avenue, Park Street, down to Wilkinson, over to the west at Wilkinson and Holly Avenue, and then the two site driveways, as well as a little Holly Avenue connector that is right there in front of Chick-fil-A. I don't know if that connector really has a name, so I'm going to refer to it as the Holly Avenue connector. You're coming off 85, you kind of swoop in there to go to Chick-fil-A, that little street where you see the number 6, stop control section. Based on the analysis, the mitigation was identified at 3 of the intersections. The other intersections, particularly the larger intersections along Park Street and Wilkinson Boulevard, the impact was shown to be very minimal. The signal at Holly and Park Street, that is the primary route for folks for site traffic that will be leaving the Culvers and exiting to go back to 85. So that was where we did see an impact. We did identify mitigation as well as the 2 site driveways. So diving into those 3 really quick. This is the Park Street intersection with Holly Avenue. The Wendy's driveway is on the eastern side of this intersection that provides the 4th leg. As I said, the majority of this traffic leaving the site would be heading on this way to add to that left turn queue, to turn left to go back towards 85. There were no capacity improvements. The impact from a capacity standpoint was minimal, but the storage was recommended based off of review of storage. So adding that traffic to that left turn did exceed the existing storage of 275 feet out there today. And so the recommendation is to increase that storage from 275 feet to 375 feet. And as the left turn, so coming from the Culvers, turn left at the signal to go north towards 85. That would be the recommendation at this intersection. Moving over to Access 1, which is across the street from the Pizza Hut. Along Holly Avenue today, there is a 3-lane section. There's a 2-way left turn lane there today, so it provides room for left turn lanes into the site. There was quite a bit of discussion with this intersection at the Scopie meeting, and it was determined that it would be best for this driveway to function as a leftover. So what that means is you can turn left in, you can turn right in, you can turn right out, but you cannot turn left out. That's the restricted movement. And the reason for that is because of the proximity to the intersection up at the Holly Avenue connector where Chick-fil-A comes in. Yeah. That proximity provided some kind of a little bit of a safety concern potentially. And so between that and a couple of these other considerations that I'll discuss, we assumed it to be a leftover. As I said, the proximity to this intersection, also connectivity. If you think about, if you zoom out from this area, if you prevent left turns out of this, as long as you have full movement at the other intersection, you still have connectivity in the area. Because if you want to go west, you could still turn right out of here and go down to the signal at Park Street to circle around. And the majority of traffic would not be trying to go back up towards the Holly Avenue connector. So there wasn't a huge need for that left turn out, but weighing that with the potential safety concern, it was determined to be a leftover Chick-fil-A's out. Now how that gets implemented was of discussion as well. Because of the opposite effect coming out of Pizza Hut, we want to make sure that the Pizza Hut driveway was not restricted because they would want to turn left out to get to the signal at Park Street. And so I believe what the applicant has determined to do is provide geometric restrictions on the driveway to restrict their movements, but not restrict Pizza Hut movements. And then finally, over at Access 2, what to highlight here, so we're going to take a step back about 3 years to this 2019 aerial. If you recall, there was an existing median opening, no driveway there. If we then jump from 2019 to 2022, that median opening moved about 225 feet west, which was away from the Culver's site. That was to align with the western driveway for the Home 2 Suites. And so there was discussion on, okay, is it okay to have 2 median openings? Do we need to figure out if we close the Home 2 Suites and reopen this one? or do we leave the home two suites and not allow a median opening here? And there's a lot of discussion with that. And so what we determined was the most appropriate was to provide another median opening for the culverts here for a number of reasons. In conjunction with that, providing a left turn lane of 100 feet minimum into the site. So the main concern with providing another median opening there was really the home to suites driveway. If you see just their eastern driveway, it would be about 150 feet away from that median opening. So the biggest concern when you have that is, are folks trying to get out of the home to suites because they can't turn left, there's a median there. They would turn right out of their driveway to quickly shift over 2 lanes to make a U-turn really fast in a short distance. That's usually the main concern. In this case, there are a couple other options that they could do. They could come over to their western driveway where they can easily turn left out, or if drivers don't feel safe, they could easily bypass that one and make a U-turn at the next one. So there's a couple of safety alternatives for the home two suites, in addition to that hotel with that driveway, pretty limited traffic during the peak hours as well. And so a number of considerations why that concern isn't increased where sometimes by providing a full movement access here, a median opening, what it also does is reduce congestion at the Hawley Avenue intersection where the Chick-fil-A is. If you think about it, if you couldn't turn left in here, more folks would turn left right in front of the Chick-fil-A to enter at access 1. If you have more left turn traffic there, it will probably back up a little bit further than blocking the access right there at Chick-fil-A. So providing a left turn access at this location, you would have more right turn traffic versus left turn traffic, which is usually good for congestion. And it also allows site traffic to travel west on Hawley Avenue by having a median opening here. If you didn't have that median opening here, what it could also do is, unfortunately, encourage folks to make a right turn out of here and a quick illegal U-turn around that median to head back west. And so another safety benefit by trade-off, if you will, of the safety concern I talked about earlier, proximity to home to suites driveway, but this would hopefully not encourage illegal U-turns. So a lot said there, and I will pass it back on over to.
Let me interrupt you. Are you going to have any further testimony?
Just for questions.
Yeah.
Let's keep this probably separated. Do you have any cross-examination of Mr. King? Okay.
So, Brady, you were the city's traffic consultant.
That's correct.
And your responsibility in this case was to look at the project and make a determination in the city's interest, what's the best way to handle incremental traffic issue related to the traffic.
Correct, for the city's ordinance.
And the 3 mitigation measures that you recommend, Park Street, those are your
I got it.
I have not seen the latest site come in. That's correct.
And then, so you work full-time in traffic consulting with TTI,
Yes, sir.
in your opinion, as long as if those mitigation measures were incorporated, would those, as a result of that, would this project or this plan would not materially endanger public health or safety as far as traffic is concerned? Is that a fair statement?
I would say that the impacts of the site would be mitigated for the city's ordinance.
Okay. And as a result of the mitigation, there would not be an adverse impact to public health or safety as far as traffic?
From a traffic perspective, yes.
I don't know if you looked at this, but the additional parking, which is part of the plan here, that helps reduce congestion. Would you agree with that? Having the additional parking in this case would reduce congestion on Hawley, what they call the Hawley
Connector.
connector.
I'm not familiar. I didn't get into the parking.
And then there was something like the EBL that was referenced in the report. What was that?
Yes, eastbound left turn lane. EBL will be eastbound left.
That's all the questions.
Okay, at what point, Parks, do we have an option to ask Mr. Binkley questions? This later or
Hold on
now?
just a minute. Are you concluded with your cross? Okay, now, counsel, Ms. Stowe.
I have two questions. One, a jurisdictional question, which I'm not sure you may know. Part of that property sounds like a public street, part is not, but it sounds to me like this is all private road, even though it's labeled Holly Avenue. Are you aware of which is or which is not?
Specific to Holly Avenue.
Mm-hmm.
Holly Avenue, I believe, is a city street.
Okay.
It's not? Okay. I'm not familiar.
Okay, so
Well-
that was one question. The other, when you mentioned geometric restrictions, specifically, what are you saying with regard to that?
Great question. Let me pull that intersection back up. So this would be geometric restrictions being, so typically to restrict access, we have geometric curbing, so monolithic concrete islands in the middle
Okay.
of, let's say, Holly Avenue. But in this case, because we didn't want to impact Pizza Hut's driveway, the geometric curbing, the islands, if you will, would be only on Culver's Drive.
Okay.
So it'll basically kind of, when you're coming out of their property, it'll just only allow you to go right. So it's where
Correct.
you can't, okay.
Yeah, I haven't seen an updated site plan, but my understanding, last I heard, I believe it's going to be like a half pork chop plus no left turn
Gotcha.
sign.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Other questions from the council?
I had one question about the AM trip generation. I was just wondering, I'm not aware whether this restaurant even offers breakfast. What would be the trip generation if it doesn't open until lunch?
Much lower. It
Okay.
would be just associate traffic.
Mhm.
Yeah,
But you
so-
didn't take that into, you just assumed it would be,
This was a generic
Okay.
fast food restaurant drive through.
all right.
And you said you're suggesting I think it was 100 feet of additional storage on that left turn from Hawley into Park. How would that be accomplished? Like widening the road or restriping or?
No widening would be needed because it's a 3-lane section all the way back, so it'd just be restriping.
Okay.
And we looked at some of the other driveways that are there that it would potentially impact, and it should not negatively impact those significantly because of the driveways that pointer that the left turn lane would extend back to, which is the northern portion of that shopping center, which I believe they have 2 driveways along there, but that's the service driveway.
Other questions for Mr. Finkel? Thank you, sir. Step down, Ms. Wright.
Thank you.
Conclude.
So after staff's analysis, we found that the regulations do allow approval of these 2 requests per special use permit. So that is why we're here before you tonight. The zoning, which is highway commercial, is an appropriate use for this use, which is a fast food restaurant. This does meet all the other requirements found within our land development code. And it's also consistent with the Montcross Swamp Area Plan, which is found in our comprehensive land use plan. It is shown in that plan as a mixed-use area, and staff notes that this is consistent. So council shall consider the following requirements for a special use permit, along with the applicant's response found in attachment A of your packet. For the record, these findings are: A, the use meets all required principles and specifications of the code, LDC, and any adopted land use plans; and B, the proposed plans, if developed according to the plan submitted and approved, will be visually and functionally compatible to the surrounding area; and C, the use will not materially endanger the public health or safety and will not substantially injure the value of adjoining property if located where proposed. Should the council make the required findings to grant this permit, staff recommends the following conditions. There were 4. The applicant must comply with the required improvements found within the attached transportation technical memorandum, which was also found in your packet, and as Brady went over those. The applicant shall process a recombination plat in compliance with section 15.3 of the Land Development Code. Condition number 3, per city engineer, a sanitary sewer analysis of downstream piping capacity must be provided with the submission of the construction documents. And the last condition being the special use permit shall be valid for 1 year. So with that, I would like to enter this presentation and my staff report into the official record, and I'm ready for any questions.
Any objection to having this submitted to the record, Ms. Rowe?
No.
Okay, we'll admit it, submit it to the record. Now, do you have any cross?
I do.
Okay.
So, Ms. Ratchford, let me start with just a couple questions on the TTM since Mr. Finkley was up here. You have gone over the 3 mitigation recommendations with the applicant, correct? And those recommendations, the stacking and the write-out only, and then the new cut on the median, those are all incorporated in the new site plan?
We made it a condition of approval that they will comply whenever they do submit the construction documents.
Okay, so that'll be taken care of at the construction phase?
Yes.
There's no objection to doing any of those changes, right? From the applicant? They're in agreement with that, I guess.
Yeah.
All right. So then let me, as far as the 2 things that we're here on, first is the front yard parking. With this property being in a curve, no matter where you are, you're either looking at a front or a side of the property. Is that a fair statement?
Yes, we would consider both, from both angles, front yards because it's facing a street.
So you really don't have, well, let me take it back. Typically, you would have parking in the side and the rear when you're talking about commercial properties.
Within this zoning district.
Correct. And in this case, you really don't have a rear parking area because no matter where you face the property, you've got the front and you've got the side.
We are considering the southern property, the rear in this situation, and then the western property line, the side. So your interior property lines would be considered the side. And the
Okay. Part of the southern may not be developed because of topography.
correct.
So the
And
develop
tree shade area.
and trees, and so the developable area is pretty much front and side in this case. As far as the 200, you went over this briefly, but I just want to make sure this is in the record. The minimum parking is based on 1 spot per 4 restaurant seats. And it really doesn't account staff that are working there or employees.
Correct.
And I think this is sort of addressed briefly in the finding, the Exhibit A, but in this case, the applicant has, in most situations, up to 15 employees that will be working at the restaurant at any given shift. Is that correct?
I will defer that to the applicant.
Okay. But part of the additional parking is going to be used, and this is typical, to make sure employees have a safe place to park and can get from the parking lot to the workspace.
Based on the applicant's application.
Okay. The site plan was reviewed, I assume, with a TRC where you had police, fire, department heads all present. And there were no, from the department heads, including the public safety departments, no concerns raised with respect to public safety as far as this site plan or this development. And I asked this to Mr. Finkley, the additional parking actually has a public safety benefit in terms of getting traffic off of the Holly Avenue. Would you agree with that?
I'm not a traffic expert, so I don't know if I can speak on that.
All right. But it would be reasonable that it would, when you have more parking and when you have spaces for a auto-dependent business, having the additional parking helps decrease congestion. Okay. We'll get Mr. Monroe to speak to this, but were you given a copy of the letter from the Southern Benedictine Society is the property owner for all of the parcels, correct?
Correct.
And they also, the Southern Benedictine Society also owns all the surrounding parcels, Abbey Plaza. Okay. And they've provided a letter, and we'll hand this out when we get to our point of speaking to the financial impact as well as the visual and functional compatibility, correct?
Within the letter, yeah.
Okay. You mentioned that this Abbey Plaza is currently zoned for HC, highway commercial. That zoning will not change as a result of the SUP.
Correct, this is not a reason.
And under highway commercial HC, restaurant is restaurant use, including a drive-through restaurant is an approved use there. You talked a little bit about the future land use plan. The Montcross small area plan is the applicable section of the future land use plan.
Yes.
And that, the Montcross small area plan is a concept that talks about it's vehicle-dependent businesses, commercial businesses is what that area is.
That's correct.
And this development is consistent with that.
Yes.
And this project, part of the future land use plan is to further goals of economic development and revitalization of the Wilkinson corridor.
Correct.
And this project is consistent with that goal. Those goals of both the property owner, that is the Southern Benedictine Society, and the city in terms of developing.
It complies and is consistent with the city.
Some of the traffic impact, usually we think of traffic impact as negative, but in a situation where you're encouraging economic development or revitalization, the additional traffic that a restaurant brings is actually a positive. Would you agree with that?
This is within our auto-centric corridor, so I would say yes.
Okay. That's all the questions I have for Ms. Ratch. Thank you.
Questions from the council, Ms. Ratch?
Peyton, we like to have the cars parked in the rear. Why do we like that? Why is that in our code? What is the benefit?
Ideally within this district, the highway corridor, typically along the Wilkinson Boulevard. So the goal would be to have the buildings kind of fronting that corridor with the parking in the rear. So it does kind of act as a buffer with the buildings in the front. And the goal is to kind of keep that consistent along that whole corridor.
All right, knowing that's our practice, did you bring to the applicant or encourage them to look at pushing the building forward and complying and having the parking in rear, even the additional percentage?
So in the early sketch plan phase, they did look at alternative locations for this building. It's a little bit tricky because it sits on the corner, so therefore there are two frontages. So kind of however you play it out, the applicants were still proposing parking within at least one of the front yards. So to accommodate all the parking they are requesting, they are providing parking in both of the front yards.
Okay.
Any other questions for Mr.
Just
Ratch?
for the record, they're asking to provide more parking than is required under the code.
That is correct.
And can you go back to the original, the slide where you showed where the location is going to be in the parcels? Because I'm sorry, you say it's 6 parcels. I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Where's the 6th parcel?
Right, so it's just a partial parcel.
Excuse
me. And so just with the lot line adjustments,
Mhm.
they are taking a portion of the parcel to the west. So it will fall a little bit on that parcel.
All right. Thank you.
Other questions from Ms. Ratch?
No.
Okay.
No other testimony on behalf of the city. Mr. Russell, you want to call your witnesses?
Sure. Dimitri, you want to come up? So if you'll start, Dimitri, with stating your name and address for the record, business address.
Dimitri Dimitropoulos, business address 7031 University City Boulevard, Charlotte.
All right. And you're based out of Milwaukee, is that right?
Milwaukee, Wisconsin.
So you flew in today to be here for this meeting. And I'd like for him to be able to just testify in the narrative, if that's right. What I'd like to ask you to do is just tell the council a little bit about your project, your experience in sort of managing Culver's. You manage other Culver's restaurants or own and operate. So if you talk a little bit about that, why you picked this spot and sort of what your hopes are or thoughts for this project. If you could just give us a little background.
Like I said, my name is Dimitri Dimitropoulos, based out of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Culver's is a Wisconsin franchise. It started back in 1984. Small town, Sauk City, Wisconsin, town of about 1,500 people. They've been franchising since about the mid-90s. I've been a franchisee with Culver's since 2000, so almost 22 years next month. When I opened my first restaurant, it was number 99 in the company, and now they're at about 850 in about 26 states. Yeah, so we've got a couple restaurants back home in Wisconsin, and then we've started looking as far as expansion goes, and thought that this market was a nice market for expansion. I've got 2 restaurants here. I've got one up in Salisbury on Jake Alexander Boulevard. It opened about 2 years ago, and then I purchased one over by IKEA in Charlotte on University City Boulevard back in December. Yeah, so like I said, I've got 22 years experience with Culver's. We've put a lot of time into, working with city staff as far as going over, how we could put this site together, make it work for everybody, the traffic engineers. As far as the design of the site and the number of parking spots, I mean, that all was taken into consideration with, my 22 years experience of operating these restaurants and, other restaurants that we have that have tighter lots or less parking or not adequate parking. And, it causes congestion within a lot. And if you've got congestion in a lot, it ends up spilling over onto the streets. So when we design these, we try to do everything we can to mitigate any future issues as far as traffic goes, but also from a guest experience. People come to the restaurants, they want to come in and out. They want a convenience. They don't want to come in, for dinner and end up frustrated in a traffic jam in a parking lot. So Culver's, the concept is owner-operators. So I'm here with Dino Lella tonight. He will be the operator of the restaurant, so he'll be the full-time partner that will be working in the restaurant. Mm-hmm. And I mean, we chose Belmont because, as far as, the analysis looks great. It's a beautiful community. Culver's likes to be involved with the city, the community, doing fundraisers and kind of, getting out into the community and being part of what's going on. And Belmont seems to be, a great community and kind of fits what we're looking for. We typically hire about 75 people to open a restaurant. We could have 15 to 20 team members working per shift, depending on the day and the volume.
Yeah.
So if anybody has any questions, I'd be glad to answer.
You have any other?
Just a couple follow-ups. So part of the parking is to make sure you've got enough for employee parking when you sort of determine how many spaces you need, how many you try to fit on the site?
It is, and with the way this lot is set up, it's not an outlot per se on a big box where you've got a parking lot behind you. You can have spillover parking. It's not a pedestrian type of area. I don't think you'll have many people walking or biking to the restaurant. And we also do not have any street parking as well. So we try to take all that into consideration when we design the lot.
Which is part of the reason for the additional parking
Correct.
request here. You've included usually in the materials, the staff asks us to include like some elevations or what the restaurant will look like. And this is looks like pretty similar to what you have in IKEA Boulevard and Jake Alexander, is that correct?
Yeah, this is the newest prototype. We work with Bill Monroe as far as the materials that they would like to see used within the development. So there's a couple changes, but other changes have been made to kind of satisfy what the requirements were for the development.
Both the requests of the property owner as well as the city zoning requirements.
Correct.
Okay. That's all I have.
Okay, questions from the council?
I have a question, and it may be more appropriate for Mr. Monroe than you, but this parking lot, that seems to be the major topic of conversation. You will build it. Will you keep it up, or will the property owner be responsible for that?
It'll be our responsibility to keep it up and maintain.
All right, because we've had some issues and continue to with maintenance and other properties on that site. So, okay, thank you.
Do you mind pulling up the site plan again?
Yeah, and I guess one thing to note on there too, I think the shaded areas are permeable pavers. So, one of the things going back and forth and designing it and with going over on the parking, a lot of those spots end up being permeable pavers as opposed to regular asphalt or pervious type of asphalt where, the water, I guess, absorbs into the ground as opposed to getting flushed out into the sewer system.
Just ask you a question. I mean, looking at the site plan, I mean, you're going to take deliveries from tractor trailers, I would guess.
Yes.
How is that flow going to be? I mean, even though it's a large parking lot, is that a tough navigation for a tractor trailer to get through there? So what I'm driving at is I've seen some businesses, we see it downtown, tractor trailer stops on the public street to offload his delivery.
No, so we do take delivery. Everything comes through the back door. And all the drive aisles are around 20 feet wide. And a lot of the corners that you see like around the drive through and that those aren't all curved in. Those are striped lines. So there's actually a lot more room for the tractor trailer to get around the side. And they do not come, when we're open for business as well. So that would congest traffic.
Okay, but then what I was driving at, they will be offloading on the property itself.
Correct, absolutely, yeah.
And, oh, I'm sorry, were you?
Yeah.
So your assessment of the amount of parking spaces that you need is based on your 20-plus years of experience running Culver's
Yes,
restaurants?
correct.
And does Culver's offer breakfast, or would you offer breakfast? Or what would be your operating hours?
Typical operating hours are 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. We do not offer breakfast.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions from the council? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Next witness.
Ask Mr. Monroe to come up.
I know that he had previously emailed a letter to council, but I want to make sure we actually get it in the record.
Sure.
Approach.
That'd be fine.
While she's doing that, Mr. Monroe, I know you're well known to council, but if you, for the record, would just state your name and business address and.
Name is Bill Monroe. My business address is 2500 Valancourt Lane in Charlotte. But I spent a lot of time at 100 Belmont, Mount Holly Road, which is the monastery. I'm under contract to the monastery to manage all of their property. So that's been since 2007. So I handle all the land lease negotiations for them, interface with all the users that are leasing land to make sure what is constructed is in accordance with the wishes of the monastery.
And again, just sort of in the narrative form, if you would talk a little bit about your involvement in this project, kind of what role you've had in bringing it to this, or interaction with the applicant and bringing this to staff, and then a little bit about the letter that you wrote with respect to what your opinion is as far as being the property manager of the financial impact, whether there's a detrimental financial impact, and your thoughts on functional and visual compatibility with the surrounding property.
Visually, the first submittal showed a stone exterior, which is more traditional for Culver's. Sent that right back and said the monks like brick. If you'll do brick, we can talk further. So we've been working with them ever since after they agreed to use brick to get a proper design that I think will fit in well with the new recent home two across the street, as well as some of the other businesses in the area. Site plan wise, I think it flows well. We've learned a lot of things not to do from Chick-fil-A. So I think this is a much improved plan. It has additional parking, which you know, and is needed desperately. We actually had to lease an additional property to Chick-fil-A because their parking just was not adequate with the original concept. We feel like with these extra spaces, this will be adequate going forward. So design-wise, we'll continue to work with them. We have full right to review final construction drawings, make sure that they will be building the building and the site in accordance with all the requirements from both council as well as requirements from the monastery.
And based on your review, there's, you do not feel on behalf of the property owner that the project will substantially injure the value of the surrounding parcels or properties?
No, I think it basically will increase the value of the surrounding properties. It offers a new food type into our mix. We have a business manager who usually never smiles in the monastery. His in-laws live in Wisconsin. When I told him we were talking at Culver's, I think it may be the first time I've seen Mike smile in his life. So bringing in the frozen custard, bringing in the burgers, it's just a great addition to our food mix.
And then just a similar follow-up. So this project appears to meet the future land use goals of providing economic development and continuing to encourage revitalization of the Wilkinson commercial corridor.
Yes, I believe it does.
Those are all my questions.
Does council have any questions for Mr. Monroe?
I have a similar question that I have for the applicant. Since you are the property owners, when we're looking at Lowe's and Walmart, do you have a similar situation? Are they responsible for the maintenance and upkeep of the parking lot? Because historically we are continuing to see an issue there. So I want to make sure we don't see that happen here and that it gets rectified there. So talk a little bit about that.
We will be looking after the property to make sure that it is maintained. Walmart is a huge corporation. I have finally made inroads to the appropriate people to solve drainage problems which have existed. What Walmart found out was that there were some temporary measures during construction that were never removed, and that was part of the problem with the drainage. They will be addressing that. They will also be addressing all the curb damage and repaving the entire lot this year. Okay. As soon as I get their schedule, I'll be glad to share it with council.
Not that it's necessarily pertinent, but the parking seems to be the major issue here, so I want to make sure we're not creating another monster. Thank you.
Yep. Other questions?
Regarding the impact on surrounding properties, whether it harms or helps, the monastery owns all the surrounding properties. Is that correct?
That is correct.
So basically, whatever impact that would have would affect the monastery's other properties and no one else's.
Yeah,
so
correct.
Yeah. All right. So it'd be in your incentive to help the neighboring properties because they're your properties.
And what we found over the years is one type of food service will generate additional business for the one next door to it. So we think this is very compatible.
Well, I'm going to take the city attorney's admonition to heart about focusing on the evidence because I do have an affinity for frozen custard, but I'll decide this purely on the evidence.
Any other questions for Mr. Monroe? Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Step down. Do you have any other witnesses? You want to make a closing? I usually say short closing.
You should always say short closing.
Start the clock.
So thank you all for hearing us. We appreciate the opportunity to present. I want to thank Mr. Ratford and Mr. Finkley for their help and staff really to get to this project. What you may not see is that getting here is a long process. So there's a lot of review of site plans. There's the TRC that was referenced briefly. So there's a lot of eyeballs on these projects before they come to you. And so it's the goal to have everything, as many questions as we can answered and to have as good a project as we can for you when we come. Of course, this is an evidentiary-based hearing. There's three things, really four if you count the third one. There's sort of two parts to that we need to show. And this is a situation where, because the zoning's not changed, because it's still highway commercial, essentially, by passing the zoning ordinance, this use and this development is approved as long as we can provide some evidence of all of these conditions that we have to meet. Yeah. So the first one is that all the principles and specifications of the code and adopted land use plans are met. And I'll also refer you to our proposed findings of fact, which I'd ask to be made part of the record. But you have consistent zoning. You certainly have the goals of economic development and revitalization. A lot of times you worry about traffic being a negative. In this situation, I would contend to you that it's positive. When you're trying to do economic development and revitalize shopping areas, you do want some additional traffic, and the traffic impact analysis, or TTM memo, in part supports that. Second thing is visual and functional compatibility. Again, you have the traffic study, which helps a little bit. The flow works. The applicant is going to, as you heard, include all of the mitigation recommendations in the site plan when it gets to the construction part. It's also been reviewed by the property owner, which we don't always have, but there's been review not only by city staff in terms of the elevation, but the property owner in terms of materials that they're using. So certainly evidenced that meets finding of fact number 2. And then number 3, this is always a little bit of a difficult one because under the code, the applicant is asked to come in front of you and essentially prove a negative. So it's sort of hard from a beginning standpoint, but here you've got the property owner saying, we've looked at this, it does not materially or significantly injure adjoining property value. There's no reason for them to approve and come to you. This is the Southern Benedictine Society if they think the project is going to injure their value of surrounding property. And then there's a host of pieces of evidence that you can use to find that that the project will not materially endanger public health or safety, starting with the TRC review by the police and fire departments, didn't find any issues there. The traffic analysis, which Mr. Finkley said was relatively minor or insignificant incremental increases, and what was there, the mitigation measures which you've heard are relatively small, and those will be incorporated. The additional parking is also helpful in terms of making sure employees have a safe place to park to get from parking to the workspace. So for all these reasons, this appears to be a good project, plus some of the other things of why that you've heard from Mr. Monroe as to why this fits into the overall concept of the shopping center. Appreciate your time, and we'd ask you all to approve the SUP.
Ask a question. Yes. I just want to highlight, you admitted the proposed findings into the record, but I want to highlight before council, I believe, in addition to or as part of these 3 findings, given that you were asking for front parking, the specific provisions of the code also contain some requirements. I believe you need to provide evidence that there is no practical alternative for the location of the parking because of the unique needs generated by the specific use, and you also need a 10-foot setback and screening for front parking. So can you go through how you met those requirements for the record?
So as to the first, the lack of a practical alternative really comes from the fact that this is situated on the curve on Hawley Avenue. And no matter which way you stand on the property, you're looking at front and side. There's really no rear. To the extent that there's a rear, it's the tree save area, which from the topography standpoint is not developable from a practical way, from practical matters, as terms of putting the parking there. And that's shown on the site plan, which I believe is part of the record, and it was introduced by the city staff. So I think it's, here's the point, I think, on that is no matter what project comes into this property, they're going to be facing the same issues. Is if you're a commercial development in an auto or vehicle dependent shopping center, there's no place to put parking on this particular site except for the front. So there's really no other practical place except to have some front yard parking, which they do. The site plan does demonstrate the setback which is required, and they will meet that. The screening will be done at sort of the construction phase, is my understanding, but they will also meet the screening requirements. Those are really not, I view those as requirements. So even if the SUP were approved, We'd still have to have the 10-foot setback. We still have to have the screening. So that's not going to change should council vote to approve this.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Need a motion to come out of public hearing?
So
I'll make-
moved.
I'll second.
Second, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right, we're gonna move to item 4, and this is, as we've done before, in considering approval of this application, you're required to make 3 findings of fact, and you have to make all 3 in the affirmative, and we'll take them one at a time. First required finding is the use meets all required principles and specifications of the code and any adopted land use plans. All in favor of that, raise your hand. Okay. Number 2, that's unanimous. Number 2, the proposed plan, if developed according to the plan submitted and approved, will be visually and functionally compatible to the surrounding area. All in favor of that finding? Okay, thank you. That's unanimous. C, the use will not materially endanger the public health or safety and will not substantially injure the value of adjoining property if located where proposed. All in favor of that finding? Unanimous.
Yeah.
Now there'd be a motion to entertain to approve this SUP with the proposed conditions attached.
So moved.
So moved.
Second.
Second, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries.
We need consistency.
Not for special use.
No.
Not special use. Okay. That concludes this matter on the agenda. Mr. Mayor, could we take a 5-minute break?
We sure can.
Just,
We sure can, yeah.
I'll let Mark get seated.
So the SUP being concluded, just for the record, the mayor, due to an illness that injury he sustained today, had to leave, and Mayor Pro Tem Turner now presided the rest of the meeting.
All right. Hope Charlie's okay. I hate to see that issue with him, but I believe we are now on item number 5. Or
That's correct.
Public hearing on updates to Chapter 6 of the Comprehensive Land Use Plan. Do I hear a motion to go into public hearing?
Is there a public hearing on one?
Yes.
Yes.
Motion to go into public
Yes.
hearing.
Second.
We have a motion and second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, we stand in public hearing.
And Ms. Locklear, be the presenter for this.
Good evening, Council. Tonight, I stand before you to transmit a recommendation from our Planning and Zoning Board. It's a positive recommendation to adopt the proposed amendments and revisions to Chapter 6 of the Comprehensive Land Use Plan. And while the items proposed are relatively minor, the Comprehensive Land Use Plan role in the city is not minor. So I wanted to give a minute of background and explanation on why we're here and how we've got to this point before you this evening. So ever since the inception of planning and zoning, it's always been solid practice to have a city vision and then rules and regulations that implement the vision. With recent changes to 160D and state law, it is now a requirement that cities adopt and reasonably maintain a comprehensive land use plan. The last major process that we went through is with our current comprehensive land use plan in 2018. We went through over a year-long public engagement, community engagement process to have the plan before you. And now we're implementing the part where we are reasonably maintaining our plan. So to that end, I wanted to just show how important it is to have the goals and action items that are in this chapter. And we use those as city staff and our advisory boards to create our annual work program, schedule those top priority action items. And we bring these things to you throughout the year. Projects, land development code text amendments are a couple examples of how we implement the goals that are adopted in our plan. So tonight, we are here specifically just to talk about the action items in Chapter 6. Well, the first 5 chapters, we're not proposing amendments to. Those were a result of, like I said, a very extensive public process. And now we're simply focusing on the spreadsheet, the items in Chapter 6. We started several months and gone to the advisory boards listed here before you: Main Street, Environmental Sustainability Board, Parks and Recreation, Historic Preservation. But we worked with boards. This is all under the purview of the zoning board. Guys, and then we approved to them in January. They reviewed it. We spent the past couple months incorporating their feedback to ensure that we're taking steps to strengthen existing neighborhoods, hear resident input related to infrastructure and other needs, and just have different barriers that are existing. So we worked with all in our board, presented it to Planning and Zoning Board, incorporated their feedback, and are now before you with the comprehensive changes. So like I said, there's nothing totally earth-shattering. There's a couple examples of things I wanted to highlight. For example, Parks and Recreation, we know that we have the community center being under construction. So that's one example of something that's been accomplished. But what we did find was that most of these items just needed minor modifications and updates to keep them relevant and good action items. We want to specifically make sure that regarding land use, that we're strengthening our neighborhoods and continue to provide a housing choice that meets the needs of all demographics from old to young families. We continue to have many mobility and transportation needs, and we updated those items. It remains a goal that we preserve and honor our historic charm. And we've also incorporated some, like I said, minor modifications to stormwater management and environmental factors found here. And I mentioned infrastructure. So of these over 50 goals, it's really just important to know that we want to make sure they were relevant, update, but not significantly changed through the years. A lot of the things here continue to be goals that we've seen in place for several years, and we're just making sure we continue to take steps to implement them. So the reason why that we are here holding a public hearing is because state law has made it clear that when we go through a plan adoption or an amendment, that we go through the same process as a text amendment. So the parallel, similar process. So we are here tonight having you hold the public hearing, consider the revisions, and to adopt the resolution that will be considered next. We always ask that you continue to support implementation as these are the goals and visions of the city. I stand by to answer any questions or concerns.
Are we doing anything to, these are all wonderful goals, great goals. Are you doing anything to update them or track our progress toward meeting them? That's sort of what I was wondering reading them. And I know this is something that even back when I was on the Planning and Zoning Board, I think Neil Brennan raised, that we've got all these things here, wonderful, but like, what progress have we made? It's been 4 or 5 years. What progress have we made towards some of these? I feel like we have, but I don't know like how we're tracking that or.
That's an excellent question. And I would say that I could tell you our staff opinion, but I think that you're bringing a point that was echoed by the Planning and Zoning Board and the users of this document. And it can be a more interactive tool. So we recognize that right now this is a spreadsheet and there's not a lot of feedback opportunity. To answer your question, I think I said we are individually accountable and departmentally accountable to show how we're progressing towards the goals and our work plans. Our advisory boards have the work plans so that we can show council that we're progressing. But I think that there is ways as we look to the future to have it be a more interactive document that's useful to council and our residents and staff.
Significance that some of the items, I've seen the spreadsheet that you attached. Is there any significance that some of them are shaded light green and others are not?
I did want to do that to show that these are ones that have been modified in some way. Throughout this process, we have had a lot of spreadsheets. We have a lot of text that I tried to keep track of being modified. And so we just use that as a way to call your attention to something that has been modified.
So there are several of these that I would propose changes to. I'm not sure if you know, to do that or if we need to conclude here any of them.
Well, I'm assuming there's no one else here to speak to this except
I
yourself.
didn't see the sign-up sheet, but that would probably be true.
I do not have any, so I'm going to assume there are none.
Okay.
Someone has them.
Okay.
Well, Parks, Mark has some questions. Is it appropriate during the public hearing?
You can do it during public hearing, or you can come out and do it during your deliberation. Are these at least likely to be anything that would invite public comment? Or is it more?
Why don't we do it?
Okay.
Do we need to do it for public comment? Do we have to remain in public hearing?
Yes.
We do. Okay.
I'd go ahead and
Yeah.
suggest your changes.
Okay.
Well, for LU2, that one.
Which page?
I got it. That one, I was not a fan of the phrasing of that. Felt very cumbersome. So I rephrased it as research and explore strategies to ensure a diverse supply of housing choices for all stages of life.
Can you say that again?
Research and explore strategies to ensure a diverse supply of housing choices for all stages of life.
Staff have any problem with that?
I think that sounds great.
Council, go ahead.
Okay, the next one, this one might invite discussion. LU4, it talks about encourage mixed-use residential subdivisions, et cetera, et cetera. So I know that, I guess what I might like to see here is some involvement of, and I think, as I was looking through the other land use goals, some emphasis on commercial development as well. And I know we've had a couple projects come through lately. Aha.
Yeah.
Okay, now you can hear me. Okay. All right. So talking about LU4. So, and I know we've had a couple projects come through where we've sort of had a mix of residential and commercial uses in the project. Just going off the top of my head, I think the Del Webb is a good example of that. Some of the other projects downtown. So I would prefer some, I guess, involvement of that in this goal. And would also, I'm not sure how I feel per se about the part in there where it says as opposed to single type subdivisions promoting only one housing type. Because I know there is kind of a time and a place for that, and there's a time and a place for mixed use or mixed residential. So I wouldn't want to necessarily exclude anything from, I guess, the palette of options that we have.
Well, you wanna, we could utilize your change to what, LU two, and incorporate something like diversified, whatever that phrase was, like diversified options or whatever.
Okay,
That
yeah,
might encompass-
diverse supply of housing choices.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good idea. So you could say like, encourage development of a diverse supply of housing choices, incorporating
And I'm happy
commercial
to,
where appropriate or something to that effect.
I'm happy to add something about commercial too. I mean, I was looking to see whether that was encompassed somewhere else, and I haven't.
Yeah, 'cause I feel like that's a real opportunity for us because that's, I think, if you're a business looking to locate here, it's not necessarily easy to find space. So I think whatever we can do to sort of encourage the procurement of additional commercial space will help diversify our tax base and our, general land use stock, so to speak. Okay. So do I need to, I don't know who's taking notes. Okay.
We're having a colloquy up there. Is there?
And thank you, Shelley. I feel certain that there are provisions. She specifically pointed out one that was in economic development number 12. But we definitely agree that with the points that you are making. So check out ED 12. That's a few pages in.
It's on page 120.
Thank you.
Well, that's
Well,
specific
actually,
to the peninsula.
Also,
though.
hold on a second because we also have reordered numbers. That's okay, I can find that. Okay, so now it is No, it's number 43. I don't know, I'm also looking at different spreadsheets. There is an item specifically that says, identify commercial nodes and recruit businesses that will support existing and future residential development south of town along the peninsula, for example. We also have included where the concept where we went to each neighborhood or area to come up with small area plans that are appropriate to meet the needs of these areas or neighborhoods. So between the identified village centers that are in our current future land use map, in our existing current, in our future land use map, we have some of those mixed use nodes that have been identified. Okay, so we have that.
Well, but the one that you've cited is specifically references south of town along the peninsula. So if there's nothing that refers to commercial development generally, then I think I'd be supportive of Mark's
Yeah, so I thought there was
changes.
some value in having it in the land use section too, since.
Yeah, I think it's great. I think we definitely support that idea.
Okay. Next one, this is borderline a quibble, but LU5 says create a housing task force to address solutions to affordable housing barriers. I would just change address to identify, because just from a, I guess, process standpoint, I feel like it would be council's role to address, the housing task force role to identify and advise.
Perfect. Agree.
I had another one. I'm not used to dealing with paper, so you'll have to give me a second. Okay. Down in economic development, ED5 says create local incentives to recruit new economic development. I changed create local incentives to identify strategies, mostly because I'm not a huge fan of financial incentives for economic development. So part of that's me. But also I felt like that also kind of broadens the, I guess the toolbox per se that you can kind of have. Because like there's financial incentives, but there's also land use things we can do and, infrastructure with utilities and that kind of thing. So I don't want it to become so focused on like cash grants and that kind of thing or tax rebates or whatever. I like it to be kind of a broader focus, if that makes sense.
And what did you have? What did you say?
I just changed, create local incentives to identify strategies. So it would read, identify strategies to recruit new economic development.
It's fine. Yeah, I think I understand that. Because I read that and I immediately think of like economic development incentives, whether that was the intention or not. And I understand that those are controversial and a lot of people don't like them. So I would agree, because I don't think that's necessarily what was intended. Let's make it broader to a lot of different things.
I concur as well. This is excellent.
All right. And I think that is actually it. So that was not quite as painful as I thought it was going to be.
And it just proves the point. When we went through this original, there's so many people that have strengths and word choices. We probably remember who those people were that brought those skills to the table. But yes, we agree, and that what you provided, I think, makes it a stronger document. So thank you for that. It really does take a team.
Parks, I would like to ask you a point of order. I don't know. I've never seen the mayor direct question anybody. I don't know if that's by preference.
You can.
You can. Okay.
Because you're still a voting member of council.
I was going to ask you, am I still voting? Okay. On LU4, I wanted to ask you, the language in here caught my eye. Encourage mixed residential subdivisions, and I know you've changed it. Permitting a range of residential types as opposed to single type subdivisions, permitting only one housing type in specific areas of the city. What we're doing here, are these our goals and preferences, or does this marry us to anything specific? The reason I'm asking is not long ago, the state was trying to push down that we had to permit quadplexes in residential communities. We did not like that. what I'm driving at here, if we adopt language like this, are we giving any weight to that argument that we turned down from the state? I mean, there's certain things that we would have preference over and not want. I don't want to do anything that enhances their position and may detract from ours if we codify this in any way.
It's not codified, it's not binding.
These are guidelines.
Okay, so these are strictly guidelines.
I think the most important thing is to take away is this still gives you, the council, the decision-making authority to do what you think is best in the different areas of your jurisdiction.
Okay.
I think it helps guide like our advisory.
Mhm. And staff for that matter, But we've changed it also, so, with Mark's edits. But yeah, I mean, obviously, what really are, these are goals, so they guide us, but, obviously, we'd still have to decide, we're the ultimate decision makers as to any particular specific project that were to come before us.
Yes. Yes.
And you can say, well, we think it serves this goal of the comprehensive land use plan, and we are free to say, we don't think it does. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Now on this, just, and this not really as it pertains to these certain text amendments, I know we talked about at the retreat. Are we still looking to circle back and revamp it? What is it, every 5 years, taking a look at the plan in its entirety?
Excuse me. Yes, sir. And we'll have a budget workshop next week, but included in the budget is funding for
Okay.
a complete rewrite, an update of the comprehensive land use plan, since it has been 5 years.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
All right, with that, does anyone have any additional questions for Melissa? All right, hearing none, then I would entertain a motion to come out of public hearing.
Motion to come out of public hearing?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That's an aye. That's not.
Oh, I was going to say, would you like to talk about this more, Richard?
I have no desire to remain in public hearing.
Turn some heads.
All right, so that would bring us to 6. Consider approval of updates to Chapter 6 of the Comprehensive Land Use Plan Agenda Memo.
I'd say a motion to approve with the changes that Councilman Seelinger's added, that his staff has noted and I think are in agreement with, correct? Okay.
I will move to approve subject to the edits that I just made and discussed.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, hearing none, motion passes. All right, this will bring us to item number 7, Major Development Plan 2022.01, Belmont Abbey Dormitories, a request to develop 2 four-story residence halls within Belmont Abbey's campus.
And just to clarify, we do not go into public hearing for this. I did not.
It's a major development plan, so it does not require a public
Okay.
hearing. We do have someone from the applicant's team who would like to speak to it after the staff report.
All right, well, thank you. As read into the record, this is Major Development Plan 2022.01. This is a request within Belmont Abbey's campus to develop 2 four-story dormitories for student housing. Each building would house 160 beds per building. Each building is over 43,000 square feet in gross floor area. The property owner is Southern Benedictine Society, the applicant MKC Architects. Now this is a major development plan where its process is outlined in Chapter 15 of the Land Development Code. Technically, this is a use and project allowed by right, but based on the certain criteria, these types of projects are required to come before the planning board and city council to approve the schematic plan. In this case, the buildings exceed 30,000 square feet in gross floor area, which brings us to the meeting tonight. So this is an aerial photograph of the subject property. The yellow star is located within Belmont Abbey's campus at the approximate location of where these will be housed. Most people are familiar with the location of Belmont Abbey College, but I'll just enter into the record. It's located north of I-85 and east of Belmont Mount Holly Road. So within your packet, you have a full set of reduced schematic plan. I've also passed out at the dais a full 2-scale set of plans if you wish to review them. The proposed buildings are located adjacent to Wimmer Circle. Now, what's interesting and nice about this layout is both of the dormitories actually face each other with the center quad in the middle. So it's a little different than most development where buildings are oriented to a street frontage. This is interior to the campus. It's normal for campus settings for buildings to be oriented towards a quad. This is a nice grassed area with mature trees and a nice pedestrian type circulation. With any development, we evaluate the performance standards. This property is in the institutional campus district of the city. These are the various performance standards. I won't go through them all, but the project as proposed does comply with all of them as it relates to height, tree safe, parking. Within your packet, you have on page 137, you have a specialized custom analysis per our request that shows that even with the addition of these dormitory buildings, they have adequate parking on site. Required for the fact having housing on site actually reduce commute. So again, it does comply with all standards. Time on that the placement of the buildings and their orientation does provide for good emergency service access. So in this case, both buildings are proposed to have fire lane access driveways located at the rear of the building with signage to ensure that there would not be parking within that area, and both of these buildings will have a sprinkler system. There was a hydrant relocation for the request and location of emergency services, and the project will continue to be evaluated as it goes through the construction plan review with the city as well as the building plan review with Gaston County. So we heard earlier the monks like brick, and you can see here the architecture is beautiful. It replicates architecture on their campus. So although it's a development by right, the process does require a step. People application was filed and a neighborhood meeting. This neighborhood meeting was held the evening of March 7th. There were no attendees other than the development team. There's no modifications of the original plan are proposed. This item went to the planning board at the March meeting. The only question really focused on the traffic impact analysis, in which we explained this was addition of student housing, which should help cut down trips. And if in the future there's a proposal to actually expand its facility, then we would evaluate whether a TIA is needed. After discussion at the planning board, they did vote unanimously to recommend approval as presented to the city council. So again, a major development plan is a unique process. The intent of this process is to provide a fair and equitable process to all interested parties, including the petitioners, affected neighbors, city staff, the planning board, and the city council. The schematic plan has been reviewed by staff. The project was notified to adjacent property owners. A community meeting was held. It was presented to the planning board for evaluation and a recommendation, and they transmit a recommendation to approve this schematic plan. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Recollection. We approved some previous dorms. One was built, and then there were some temporary ones. I'm assuming those are gone.
Yes.
Where are these two new dorms vis-a-vis the one that was built?
The one that was recently built?
Yeah.
So out of the two, one was built. There were some other topography issues in which the second building will not be built. But the one that is built and complete and currently being utilized is near the athletic fields,
Okay.
the back of the campus. These proposed dormitories will be located off of the circle near the large parking lot. I can't remember. Yes, he can tell you it's next to a building. I'm not quite sure.
The building from 2019 goes to the south of the store line, and then you can see south of the star, and so then we built more central campus in there. So I think
Okay, thank you.
So just out of curiosity, is this to meet a current demand with the students, or is this actually an expansion to the actual college?
long term, they're hoping to get rid of some 1950s structures that do not architecturally contribute to their campus, and unfortunately are facing some maintenance needs. Before they could even consider a proposal like that, they have to beef up the amount of housing that they do have so that they can do a one-to-one transfer, because they would not like to have a year of students where they can offer 200 beds of housing less than they currently have. So they're not currently proposing any demolitions at this time, but part of their long-term plan is just continue to beef up the structures on campus.
All right, I'm just going to interject for the audience and our viewers at home. This is Joshua Tomey. He is the applicant team representative with Belmont Abbey.
Yes, sir. I'm the director of design at MKC Architects. My firm did both in 2019 as well.
Thank you.
Shelley, I just have one question. I mean, I assume the answer is yes, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Our ladder truck, these are 4 stories off grade. I'm sure it can reach that 4th story. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. All right, are there any further questions on this item?
No.
No? Okay. Ms. Tomey, thank you. Staff, thank you. All right, that would bring us to.
So I'll move to go out of,
We're not in public.
we're not in public hearing.
All right, that would move us to item number 8, consider a resolution approving MDP 2022.1 Belmont Abbey dormitories. Is there a motion to approve?
I will move to approve the resolution as presented.
I'll second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No. Motion passes.
And we do not need a consistency finding? No. Okay, thank you.
Okay, that will bring us to, I believe, number 9 now is where we are. Consider an amendment to zoning application 2017.02A for one lot of the Tower Crest.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. Before Shelley begins the presentation, we're getting some popping and kind of static that may be due to proximity of cell phones to the microphones. So if you could move your cell phone to the other side of the table from your mic pack, and that should help. Thank you.
All right, Shelley.
Thank you, sir. The project before you is an amendment of ZA 2017-02A, which affects the Tower Crest Conditional Zoning District. So this request is to consider the amendment of this district for the community known as Tower Crest. Specifically, the applicant is looking for relief of a rear yard setback on Lot 1 of the community. This is a result tied to a structural field change associated with work done to the slope on the site. There are no other proposed changes. Just a little background. Many of you were involved in the approval of the original conditional zoning district where the applicant rezoned this property to neighborhood center residential conditional district, and it authorized the development of a 12-lot single-family dwelling residential community. This was approved by council in January of 2018 and did receive a time extension as well. So while we were processing the construction plans for this site, the applicant actually modified their plans and reduced the 12-lot subdivision actually to 11. So this is a 11-lot subdivision that's been under construction over the past 8 months and is nearing completion. So here is the original site plan approved for the site. Again, this proposal of the amendment affects only Lot 1, where you see the star is located. Lot 1 is the furthest north point of the neighborhood. The uses to the north is the church parking lot, and then to the east is the city's water tower property. So the project received a conditional zoning, a time extension, approval of construction plans, and then for the individual lots received approval of a zoning permit from the city. Lot 1 was approved for this 2-story single-family home, as well as this garage. Now this garage, although connected through a breezeway where it's just a roof line, it still meets the intent of a detached structure. So the project was issued a zoning permit where the detached garage is allowed to be as close as 5 feet, but is proposed at 17 feet from the property line. And the front house, of course, meets all the setbacks on the site. So during construction, there was a field change. Now, in most cases, field change do not result in a problem on the site, especially if they're structural, where they're dealing with slopes or soils and they have to change out soils. Well, in this case, it did affect the zoning and the approval of the existing zoning permit. So first of all, a little bit about the physical attributes of the site. Lot 1 has the steepest topography on the site. It directly abuts the city's water tower site as well as the parking lot, which is at least, I would say, about 10 to 12 feet above grade for this single family lot. During the garage construction, that is when the field change occurred. The roof line elevation actually caused a problem with the adjacent slope and retaining wall. There was concern by the builder that it could result in long-term water and moisture accumulation affecting the home, and it could cause a problem with erosion on the adjacent property, which is the city's water tower property. So the builder consulted with Gaston County, the project architect, and the structural engineer, and the recommendation in the field change was that they raise the roof by building a second story onto the garage to raise the roof line above the slope. That was done with the construction of a bonus room, and then this bonus room was connected through a hallway of the second story of the primary house. Well, all of these changes resulted in a violation based on our definition of attached in detached structures and setbacks. So the photos here can better display some of the issues. So here is the home with the second story that's been connected with the garage. That shows it on the far left. So again, the project was originally approved with a single-story garage, an open breezeway, and just instead of where those windows are, a complete second-story connection, there was just a roof line which would act as a breezeway and would be considered detached. I put this photo here on the right to show how the retaining wall and the adjacent slope on the property, how it steps up all the way up actually to the same level as the first story of the garage. Here's another angle. The right photo, I think, displays the issue the best. What you're looking at here is the actual second level of the garage. So as you can see, the whole first floor of the garage is actually below the adjacent grade. On this side, this is the city's water tower site. So if you can imagine if they try to build a roof line on a single story that cuts right into the slope and would cause the runoff and so forth of that. So I thought this picture really did display a good angle on the slope issue in the for the site and what they were working on. So again, this field change, although it was coordinated with Gaston County and they brought in structural engineer, they did not consult the city's zoning department. And this field change was made. A staff member was inspecting another site and it came to their attention. It just didn't look, from what they could recall, consistent with the approved plan. So once we researched it and called the builder, we talked to them about the issue and found that by building the second story of the garage, it did two things. They attached it to the primary home, which means it should meet the setback for the primary structure, which is 30 feet. If it was detached and they built a second story, it still was a violation and had to be corrected because second stories on detached structures still have to meet the setback for the primary building. So we looked at different options. Can you tear this off? Can you adjust this? Can you separate the structures? And each option we looked at brought us right back here to this proposed amendment that you're receiving this evening. So we did evaluate the various options. So with that, we are here tonight because the applicant is seeking a reduction in the rear yard setback for Lot 1 only from the required 30 feet to a 17-foot rear yard setback for this lot. I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Well, the first question I would have is why, what was the explanation as to why the builder did not come to the city? In other words, you've done a whole lot of work and we're the place that you should be dealing with this.
Yeah, I can't.
Okay.
The applicant's representative.
Okay.
Again, sometimes there are structural changes in the field, and most times it doesn't affect zoning.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, it did.
Definitely.
So,
yep.
Yes.
Do we internally as a city, do we have guardrails that are in place to, because, and I think, just talking and kind of thinking about it, I can see why it was done.
Mm-hmm.
I can see it. We walked it. I was invited out there to
Mm-hmm.
walk. I think everyone was walking through it, but I have a real problem with it being done and then now coming to council because now we're kind of cleaning it up. There's a process, and the process was not followed to an extent. And I don't know, as us as a city, do we have guardrails that are in place to say check A, check B, check C? Because walking it, it appears that all that's left is the finish. Oh, it just needs the finishing inside. The building is there. I mean, it's put up. So I don't know if we, as a city, have guardrails that could have prevented it to get to this.
And by guardrails, you mean like procedural safeguards, not like literal guardrails.
No, Jim,
Okay.
not actual
All right.
guardrails.
That's why I'm-
The answer to the question is no, we don't have enough because we had a situation with Essex Home, with the McLean property. And so this is a minor version of that, but it's like, okay, this is the way it's happening. We need to figure it out. And we don't want somebody to tear their house down or a building and that kind of thing. So to my way of thinking, if we do allow this, then we're going to have basically a do not call list and say, okay, if you've done this first time, then we're going to have to monitor you every week as a city, because this is a waste of our staff time and ours too, because we're trying to solve a problem that should never have occurred.
Mhm.
Especially if you have reputable builders, and in this case, a well-known builder, somebody's been here for some time. So we're going to have to ask our staff to figure out some safeguards, whatever you want to call those, because this is not what we should be dealing with.
Did we change our processes as a result of the McLean issue? Because this seems like a very similar situation.
We did institute foundation surveys, and that was the problem out there. They built some homes that didn't meet the setbacks, and it wasn't found out until the end. The foundation surveys are required just after the foundation is done. It's supposed to be prior to the final framing inspection. So yes, to answer your question, yes, we put a process in place to avoid that.
But that's
it
not-
would not
That
have
wouldn't
helped
solve
in
this,
this case.
Okay.
It would not have helped.
And
in
how
this
did you
case.
all find out about, like, how was the violation discovered?
A staff member was doing an inspection on another lot
Mhm.
in that area and just happened to look over there and notice it and sort of scratch your head. Because most of the homes all have the same breezeway with the single-story garage. So she came back in and pulled the plans, and then we called the builder.
Do staff
And-
members what are their inspection duties?
They inspect at the front end of a zoning permit, the field, so they go out with the field inspector from Public Works. So there's a lot of inspections that happen continually. For the zoning inspector, she checks the site initially to make sure everything's staked out and it's going to go where it's proposed to go. And then when they're called for final inspections, they go back out.
So they go at the
Beginning and the end. And the
but
end.
anything that happens in between, they're not necessarily, in other words, there's nothing that was missed in an inspection by staff that should have been.
Right. What happens is once they get their zoning permit and their building permit from Gaston County and they pass all the inspections, then it's Gaston County, it's inspecting for building code.
And there was an inspector here, I believe I saw, a Gaston County building inspector.
Gaston County building inspector, from my understanding from the builder, was involved in helping to find a resolution to the slope in this issue. It was part of the group that came up with the recommendation, and this did pass the building inspection.
I mean, I share a lot of Alex's concerns with the lack of the failure to follow the process. You know, I don't, you know, I was not real happy about the McLean situation, and this feels like a very similar sort of situation where somebody has solved the problem themselves and then come to us to kind of clean up the mess. You know, I think, you know, we can beat up on the staff, but ultimately this could have been solved by a quick phone call from the builder to the planning department. You know, and I don't want people to get the impression that it's easier to ask us for forgiveness than permission. Which I feel like is the biggest issue for me. So I'll just talk.
Well, I got another one coming.
I'm back. Okay. Yeah. So because like I mean, to Martha's point, this isn't really what we as a council need to be dealing with. I feel like this is not a good use of anyone's time, and ultimately, it's the builder's fault for failing to follow the code. So.
Well, let me ask you, did I just understand you today that just say that, okay, we look at it, the site initially, do some preliminary measurements, and then we don't come back to the very end because in between, the assumption is that he is following the approved plans?
That's correct. And we do, in between that, get a foundation survey from the builder during the process. So that's how we make sure the setbacks, but it doesn't show 3 dimensions. Like it wouldn't show a second story being built on top of the garage. You have the foundation of the garage and the main house, makes it look like everything is perfect. So it doesn't give 2 dimensions, it's just the foundation survey.
Well, I mean, that's a big gap in the middle. I mean, maybe we should get some eyes on a project somewhere in between inception to completion. You know, the developer, this is not his first rodeo, so to speak. You know, now while the county may have issued a field change, I think it would be an incumbent on the developer to say, well, okay, this is a major change to the elevation. I'm adding an additional room. Maybe I should go and run this by staff. But I feel like we should have more of a hand in the process along the way. I mean, I don't want to be too onerous on anybody, but, you know, just like McLean had recently those 9 homes that we've had these issues with. But prior to that, I mean, going farther back, McLean came to us, they had miscut a bunch of lots. Mm-hmm. And, you know, they were in a position of, if we did not give them a pass on it, so to speak, that they were going to have to redo those lots. So this is not a one-off. I mean, something similar has happened before. You know, at some point, somebody needs to be held accountable for this. I mean, like Mark said, you know, I don't want us to get the reputation of, well, you know, the code is there, but, you know, historically, once there's been a snafu, there's always been a pass granted. You know, McLean miscut 30 or 40 lots. We granted them, or the majority of council granted them, to keep everything looking the same. You know, 300-400 homes then adopted that profile.
And if you will recall, the second time Stephen Henshaw came, I told him, basically, we did not expect to see him again in front of us. And that should not be a situation that comes to us. I should never have had to say that to anyone, but by the time you're coming the second time and said, you've messed up again, I don't want to see you. In other words, if you're a reputable builder, that kind of thing. So I think it, unfortunately, is falling to us to do more restrictive kinds of things, because it's ending up at the end of it wasting your time and our time.
Well, sorry.
Well, you know, the way I feel about this is we are being asked to come in and back clean up. Mm-hmm. It's there in the code. We have a code for a reason. You know, we're being asked to do a rewrite to make somebody whole when, as Alex was saying, I mean, to a great extent, the guardrails were in place. You know, they should know to come seek advice. I mean, whenever there's a major change like that to an approved plan, I mean, it would just seem to me that, yeah, okay, you talk to the county, but you are building in the city of Belmont. It may be wise to go talk to the planning and zoning department in Belmont. You know, I don't want to see in the habit of having to rewrite code to fix someone's problem. I mean, that's the worst perception of us that we could have, is that we will back clean up on these issues.
What would be the consequence or the result if we were to deny this amendment?
Well, basically, the garage portion in the house would have to be removed. The second story, which has a built-in retaining wall adjacent to the slope, and the house would have to be altered as well. And again, everything that you're entering into the record is the conversation we had with the developer. Why didn't you call us? You
Sure.
know, if there's a field change, you should check with us. Even if you think it's okay, you should always call us just so we can review it. Initially, we were not very happy. We went out, saw the site, saw what they were working with, and we understood, not that it makes it right, but when you see the site and the difference in the topography and how they try to resolve it, looking at the right side and left by actually raising the roof line to avoid future runoff that could cause problems. Structurally, it makes sense. Zoning wise, no, they made a huge error in not checking with us. So if we were to roll it back, the developer determines while they're building the garage that they have a problem with the roof line, they could have stopped, came and asked us about it, but we would still end up right here. Because to resolve this issue, they took a structural building approach for a field change, but we would still be
We'd still end
here.
up here, but they
We
would have
end up
asked
here, but
first.
They would have asked
And the
permission
consequences of us denying it would not be having to tear down a structure that was built.
Exactly. They would have had a half-built garage until we tell them, do a temporary covering until we take it through the process, but you need to seek relief. We would still be here seeking relief, but the building would not be finished. You are correct. And one other thing I want to point out, when we evaluated this, we understood because of the construction, but one thing that we do think is a little different in this case is that it was done for structural correction, which some of the other cases that you mentioned, they just didn't follow the code, made a mistake. They just didn't ask and get the approval prior. Also, this is unique in the setbacks are intended to ensure that there's light and air to buildings as well as protect privacy. In this case, this property abuts a parking lot as well as the city's water tower site. So it does not affect an adjacent residential property owner as it would relate to privacy, looking over in someone's rear yard. So that little bit out of this situation, but you're right, they didn't ask permission before they finished the building.
Shelley, what would you suggest in the future? In other words, if we would approve this, what do we need to do to hold a builder's hands to make sure this does not happen? Because this is onerous on you guys at that point.
Right. So we cannot hold everybody's hand. So when we do pre-cons, especially with experienced builders here, we hold pre-cons and we give them the rules. We tell them if there's any field changes that they're supposed to check with us.
Tell them that.
We tell them that, yes. And we've actually introduced a second pre-con that we are starting
by
to
pre-con,
do.
you mean pre-construction?
Oh, I'm sorry, pre-construction meeting, I'm sorry. So typically, we only have a pre-construction meeting. The initial one is held with the contractors who are moving dirt on a site, doing the infrastructure. Well, we've now introduced a second pre-construction meeting for the building teams because sometimes they change. You get one team of graders out there putting in infrastructure, and then a builder comes along with a different building team, and we want to tell them the same housekeeping rules and so forth. Hey, check with us if you're going to change anything. So we have introduced this new process, and beyond that, again, it was spotted by our planning technician out in the field. It just didn't look right to her. We pulled the plans and called the builder immediately and had a long conversation. And we've actually been trying to evaluate options, and we can't figure out any other option other than tearing it down or cutting deeper into the slope adjacent to the city's water tower site. That would resolve this issue other than coming before the board and asking for relief.
Do we have a representative from the
We do.
applicant?
So we'll invite John Russell.
And we
Into
would
the lion's
appreciate,
den.
we would appreciate whatever you say with regard to this is succinct.
Sure, well, if you put up the one that shows the retaining wall? Mhm. So I guess I'd say, first of all, I'd be happy to take questions. For the record, I'm John Russell, and I'm here on behalf of Bauer Troust and Belmont Residential LLC, which are the developer and the builder. Couple things that I would emphasize are, first of all, the unintentional nature of this zoning violation, the reason for being here. This is really a result of like the construction team being in the field and trying to solve the problem. And one of the ways, in addition to what Shelley said, if on these two slides, one of the things you'll see, if you compare the house on the right to the house here on the left, they even had to elevate the garage, the number of siding lines to get up to where they could even put the second story on there. And so they really did run into, you know, when you have everything laid out, it looks great, then you get out there and you're in the field, they really did run into an issue where they were literally cutting the roof right into the slope of the hill, which in addition to the erosion problems for the water tower, the moisture problems for the house, it's a big safety concern to have like a roof right there at ground level when you've got neighborhood and children living in the house or children in the neighborhood. And so they were looking at this as a problem issue, and how do you actually get out there when you've got a site, an actual work site, rather than a two-dimensional set of plans. We brought in an architect, we brought in a structural engineer. They did make a mistake, and I think Shelley's talked about that. There have been a lot of conversations and ways to try to figure out alternatives other than coming to here and ask for this. But the reason this happened, and I do think that it's relevant, I think it's a relevant consideration that goes to the questions that you have as to, does this council appear to be the cleanup hitter, the organization or the entity that fixes mistakes? But this is a result of what the reason that they're here is a problem-solving effort. That they had an actual structural, field, topographical issue that resulted from the site that they had.
Can I stop you there for a second? I want to ask you a question. I mean, I don't build, but the topography, it's known topography. And when you submit your plats and plans, you know that you have got a hill here that you have got to contend with, and you know the elevation of the house, et cetera. I mean, is this not something that could have been identified when you're looking at the height of that hill and you're trying to put that one more house there, and you know that your first story is X amount of feet and your second story is X amount, and you're looking at that hill? I mean, did they not take preliminary measurements to say, okay, this is going to be somewhat problematic because we are abutting this hill. How are we going to account for that in our elevation?
The answer, like in hindsight, is probably yes. That, you know, if you had gone back and looked at this, where is this retaining wall going to fit in? But prior to the retaining wall, that slope was much more gradual, is what I recall. So I don't think there was a true realization as to where does the garage hit, where does the retaining wall go, where does this all fit, until they got the footprint built on that.
In answer to your question, Richard, at my own home, when we built it, we had a hill, and we had no idea, neither did the builder, but we ended up with about a 15 or 16 foot retaining wall. So that part can happen. Although I'm not trying to cover for the builder, that particular issue I am aware of. My question though, why did the builder not think to come to the city with all of this? This was not a one-day process to figure this out. So I'd like to know why.
I think the answer to that is, from their perspective, is you work through the project. You're working with planning and zoning staff. You work through that. You come to get your conditional zoning approval. You've got that. Then you're in the construction phase where you're dealing with Dallas, where you're doing the soil and sedimentation. Then you're doing the building and you're dealing with the building inspector. And they were on site and they were looking at this. And the building code defines this area above this as attic, which in their mind is, okay, we're okay because it's attic. For whatever reason, in hindsight now, it seems obvious to pick up the phone and call the planning department and say, we've had to make a change because of a physical or structural issue that we've encountered in construction. Can you come out and look at this? So it certainly, when we're all sitting here with the benefit of hindsight, it seems like the easy and obvious thing to do when you, sorry.
I understand. I do feel that is somewhat undermined by the fact that the planning director said that they tell the builders at the pre-con, call us with field changes. I believe that was the testimony.
Yeah, and with all this stuff they had to do to make this work, somebody should have thought, hey, maybe Belmont might want to know about this because, what you're talking about with the grade changes and setting the second story at whatever level it's at and all that stuff. It wasn't just a simple here you go. There were a lot of things they had to do to make this work from an engineering perspective.
For sure. There are also some things I also want to emphasize because I do think it's important. This, I think, is really different. This is not the same as some of the situations. There are some important differences that are encountered in the past. Number one, they're not coming to you with an entire redo of the site. There were two phases of the McLean thing. First, they put in the road and they had all the sites, so they misread the conditional zoning. Then after getting relief there, then they still built properties that were in the wrong places, in the wrong location. So this is really the result of a single problem which they tried to solve. They should have come to city council, no question about that. But they stayed in the footprint. They're built in the footprint. The front setbacks were not changed. This is a developer also, and Shelley mentioned this, that was approved for 12 homes, 12 subdivisions, and they built 11. They chose to do less. So it is not a developer that is trying to squeeze more development into a space. It's trying to take advantage of a conditional zoning approval in terms of getting more out. It is really the result of trying to solve the problem. And to me, or I would contend to you that is a different situation, and it is important, particularly because what I'm hearing the council say is we're worried about how this would be perceived, the fact that we're now creating a roadmap for developers to make a mistake and then come back to us for help. I don't think you are. I think, as long as you take each case individually, as long as everything is on a case-by-case basis, this can be distinguished from a situation where someone intentionally or negligently or through carelessness doesn't follow the conditional zoning, doesn't read through it carefully, and comes back for a cleanup. This is a situation where it's a problem, and they're trying to solve the problem. And in the end, there's also kind of an argument here that the product is really good. But at the end of the day, we've got a really good product which looks good. There's no change in function in terms of the parking and how that works. And the end user, the occupant of the home, whoever that is, it's not under contract. They're not going to do that until they get this issue resolved. This is a really good product for someone in the community to live in.
I don't think we debate that at all, and worried is not what it is. We're trying to be very professional in how we handle what we do, how we have our zoning people and development people work, and this does not make us look professional. So it's not a worry thing. We're trying to be at this level, and having to work in this kind of framework doesn't put us at that particular level. And I will make a motion that we approve this, but it does not sit well with me, and I think the next time this builder comes with a project, unfortunately, Shelley, you guys are going to have to hold his hand, because we do not want to see this again. Like we got hit second time with the plane. We don't want to get hit the second time here, because this is a reputable builder, and I do appreciate that he's trying to do what you said, but we cannot have this happen again. So I will make the motion that we approve of this.
And I'll second, but I will say, at the end of the day, it's hard to find a palatable outcome to this. I certainly am not in favor of economic waste. And I think that given the relative harm from what's been done versus what would be required if we were to deny the amendment would be wasteful, and I'm not sure to much purpose if, all that would mean is you'd come back having torn down the building, still having to, like Shelley said, still having to be where we are. Right. So we make you tear it down just to come back to us and potentially grant it. So I do think that there's a lot of, it would be wasteful to deny it and make your client tear it down. However, I do think that the points a number of my colleagues have made, including Martha, is a valid one, that I don't want, regardless of precedent or the distinction between this and McLean, I don't want people, developers, builders, to feel as if, well, whatever, code schmode, if I screw something up, they'll fix it on the back end. That's a very, very valid point. I wish there was, I know with McLean that we had, well, let's build a park, let's build a sidewalk. I don't think there's any of those options here, given the small scale of the site. But, I don't want to start going down that path. I will second, because I think in the end it would be economically wasteful to go through the charade of making them tear it down just to go through the whole thing again. But, I don't know how we're all going to vote, but, I can certainly understand anyone who thinks that the argument about, sending a signal about what's acceptable and what we'll do, clean up hitting or whatever, that's certainly a valid point. If that's what in their mind weighs heavier in this case. So,
well, I think the process is important. And then also, I don't know that it's necessarily reasonable to expect our staff to, micromanage every project in the city. I just don't think that's a good use of their time or our resources. And that, if the message is that if you do something that's not compliant, you can't expect council to fix it. You're going to have to fix it yourself. That seems to me a pretty strong incentive for self-policing, so that we don't have to rely on our staff to be out there standing over the shoulders of these builders who should know better, and making sure that they're going to do what they said they were going to do.
We may need to have some research done about what other jurisdictions do about fines, because to me that's what I would think is going to be more appreciated.
I agree with you there.
If you tell me you're going to slap a big fine on me for doing something like that, then that's going to make me even more cautious.
Because the way I look at it, and again, just since we're all kind of giving our 2 cents, is, again, when I walked out there, I can see why it was done. But my problem with the issue is there's no recourse to the developer right now if we just go in and say, we will fix this, we will wave the magical wand. And then that's the issue that I have. And then the precedent has been set. The exception becomes the rule. So that's the problem. I'm getting hung up on it, but I can see why it was done. So for me, I want to lean towards looking at it as to if it would have come the proper route, but there is a big issue there. And that disconnect needs to be resolved, because we cannot just come in and fix this stuff every time you don't follow the ordinance or you don't follow the code. So I just wanted to put those 2 cents out there.
Well,
I want to respond to something, because Alec didn't have the benefit of hearing the legal opinion on I understand the idea and the concept, but when you interject precedent, okay, in conditional zoning, precedent doesn't matter. There's no relevance to precedent, because each conditional zoning project is a zone unto itself. So, David.
So like a separate court case is what you're saying.
Yeah. So
every piece of land is
individual entity would get it with
Mhm.
mutually
On its own.
What you
exclude.
do, if it's a CD, if it's a conditional district, you can rule one way on this conditional district, but it has no bearing on that same issue in a different conditional district.
Decision.
Okay. And that's David Owens got a special place in his book on zoning from the School of Government that says that. I gave it to council a couple of years ago, but you weren't on the council at that time. Just so you have.
No, perfect. No, I appreciate that. Thanks, Parks.
Well, I mean, I would just add, I still would say that somewhere between inception to completion, I think we need to have eyes on the project. I would have assumed that we did, to go out there and look at it, just to put our eyes on it, make sure everything is moving along and that they are in compliance. You know, there's two sides to this, and I'm having trouble finding disagreement with either one of them. To what you have said about the economics of the situation, is to ask him to tear it down only to come back and rebuild it. Can be seen as maybe, I don't know if that's onerous or not in some way, because there was a process in place to be followed, which would have brought us to a different process, more front-loaded than rear-end loaded. And
But I think you have to consider that the people the engineers and stuff made their particular recommendations, and so that was done appropriately. And so it doesn't make common sense for us to say, well, you need to fix this a different way when they did the best they could from that standpoint. I think you're correct. I think we're going to have, unfortunately, our staff have more times that they weigh in on it.
You're right. I'm not debating the solution, because I'm neither an architect or an engineer, because that probably is the most feasible solution. It's more process-oriented, is that just because Gaston County approves a field change, the assumption is that Belmont will also.
Mm-hmm.
And you know, Shelley, you know, adding in that they tell them up front, you know, any field changes need to come to planning and zoning. You know, the assumption can't be made that everything is going to fly. So, is there any more discussion on this by anyone?
I would just add on the staffing side, you could authorize multiple additional zoning inspectors, and we would not have caught this. I mean, if you look at it on page 160, you see what the plans that we approved for the permit, and then you come back and you see what was built. You really aren't going to catch that until it's built. And so we're out there inspecting for zoning. We're inspecting for the setbacks, and then at the end for the landscaping and everything else. So that's primarily, we're looking to make sure that all the buildings that are permitted are built in the proper place. So once it goes vertical, that's really outside the realm of the zoning part. This could have been easily solved with a phone call.
Yeah.
And I mean, you could give us 10 zoning inspectors, and we may not have caught this until we did. And by the time you called it, you know, it's sort of too late.
Well, so Adrian, what should we do? Just throw it back to you guys to research and advise us if there's something else that should be done in the future or not?
I mean, we'll certainly take more zoning inspectors. I mean,
Our zoning inspectors,
there's plenty of work to do that. So I'm sure.
No, that's not what I'm asking. Okay. Okay, but would you guys go back and look and see if there's something we have not done as a city, or because we want to make sure we're doing it properly?
Maybe fines. I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I would be interested in looking
seeing what
into
other
that
jurisdictions are about
as a
fines.
route.
Yeah.
Because that makes more sense. That would provide, a sanction for what could have been avoided. That's a mistake that's on the developer, but it would not involve the waste of tearing things down just to build them back up or whatever. I think that would be more appropriate. But
All right,
All right.
so we finished.
I'm going to go ahead and call the question. We have a motion and a second. So for consideration on amendment to ZA 2017.02A agenda, all those in favor?
Aye.
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 All those opposed? All right, the vote carries 4-1. All right, that brings us to item number 10, acceptance of proposal for conservation services for the Spirit of the Fighting Yank statue in Stowe Park.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. I will be brief since Kansas is playing basketball in a few minutes.
Ish.
I mean,
Yes.
Carolina's playing.
Yep. You need to be succinct too, because I'll make the motion. on
Was
this
Wake
moment.
Forest in the tournament?
So
Don't
we
they-
were we
did
were
they make it?
we were yielding to others this year. So as I've told you over the past several months, I've been working with Ron Folk and Juan Logan on the Spirit of the Fighting Yank. The statue itself is about 75 years old and has been out in the elements since then. And as it's evident that there's not been a lot of maintenance done, and it's starting to show its age and its wear. We have worked with two different art conservationists to get proposals for how to restore the statue itself. These are not just the design professionals that you just come by. So we appreciate Juan Logan for his expertise and his recommendations and his contacts. We recommend that you accept the proposal from, let me make sure that I pronounce it correctly, Terra Mare Conservation out of Charleston. The proposal is in your packet, and the cost is $24,447. We can take that out of our current parks maintenance budget to handle that. They were working to get in their queue. They would prefer to work in the spring or the summer. There has to be a certain temperature for all this to work. So they would prefer to do it in the spring or summer. So we're trying to get on their calendar. But we do recommend that you accept this proposal so that we can preserve the Fighting Yank.
I'll make a motion, we accept the proposal. And one of the reasons I want to do that is that I was I think the sole person on the council who did not vote to move it because I did not think we could protect it. Thanks to the cameras and all that stuff that's been added, we protected it in that way, and we certainly need to protect it in this way. So I will make that motion.
I would like to second that.
Can I just one more thing?
Sure.
Do we happen to have a scaffold? Because I looked at the proposal and it said 5,000 of that 24,000 is scaffolding, and should the city have professionally erected scaffolding or an enclosed work platform, they would take that out of the cost.
I don't believe that we have the type of scaffolding that would be necessary for this. And that was one of the things that they talked about is it's a really expensive part of it, but it's necessary in order to have a safe workspace and have access to the whole thing.
And I would have expected a more detailed contract, personally. Like it says nothing about cancellation, termination, representations and warranties, indemnities, governing law. I would just have expected a more detailed contract. But, it's also...
So this is a proposal with some terms and conditions. If you would like for us to work with them on a very lengthy legal
Well, I don't need to
contract.
be lengthy, but that's certain. What if there's a dispute?
I think part of this too is you're looking at craftsmen and artisans more than what we're looking at for typical building kinds of things. It's a little bit different type of entity.
And this is something that they specialize in and have gone into multiple historical districts too as well.
Well, I specialize in contracts, so.
I will be glad to work with you, Councilman Halfrent, on a very long contract that covers everything.
That's fine.
But what we're asking tonight is that you accept the proposal so that we can
I think he's got a good point. I think a contract that protects both parties.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to be, 100 pages, but.
So you will work out the parts of the contract as long as we do the proposal part. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, and
Okay,
it sounds like
all
we
right.
have a volunteer to help me with that.
Okay, good.
That's fine.
All right, you've got yourself a job, Jim.
All right.
All right.
Okay, so we now have a motion, a second. We've had discussion. Is there any more discussion? All right, with that motion and second on the floor, all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? None opposed, motion passes.
Thank you.
All right, that brings us up to our CIP overview agenda memo.
Thank you. And our city engineer will give you a brief overview of the upcoming CIP workshop.
Actually, I only asked for 5.
Let's actually set the timer to 3.
Give him the green.
Okay. All right, you all should have received your copy of your draft CIP. So we're not going to go through that tonight, but I do want to inform you on the process that we're going to go through from here out to get this adopted and approved. For information for the newer members of the board here, we do a CIP program so that we identify the needs and desires of the community. We list those needs and develop basic costs so you know what they're going to cost, and then understand the procedures for implementation, you know, whether there be permits required and so on, and determine funding sources. That's usually pretty simple, but sometimes we want to include available funding sources through the state. And then plan for the orderly implementation of projects. The program, capital improvements program, it includes projects that we consider needed in the next 5 years. I've encouraged the department heads to be thinking further out. Generally, capital improvements plans try to get out as far as 10 years. So I said, think about the following 5 years also. Any project by any department that has either a capital project or an equipment purchase that costs more than $50,000 we include in the document. And then we rank those projects based on need and importance. I've gone through that process with the staff members, so they have a good feeling for that. And then determine, you know, how we're going to fund it, and then implement an annual review and updated report. Got slowed down last year, so we didn't do this last process. And then update the project listings so we have each project and its projected year purchase or construction. This is the work plan, and rather than read through the whole thing, I'll just tell you we are at point 8, where we want to work with elected officials to set project priorities. And then once we do that, I can adjust the cost for the various projects because I include inflation factors and other items in the costs, such as loans with interest rates and so on. And then we'll produce the final CIP document and then come back next year and we repeat the whole process. So I'm giving you, letting you know that we will meet on the 18th of April to have a discussion and set priorities for each project. And then after their workshop, I will adjust the projects. If you look at the CIP, you can see they are placed in certain years in the forthcoming 5 years. And we'll get those sheets adjusted properly, and then I will ask for council to adopt, concur with the CIP, and then we'll work on how we're going to implement it. That will affect your budget in some cases, certainly give us a better planning. So, homework assignment. Mark, you're going to have to read it, the paper document. Sorry.
I will survive.
Okay. I'd like you all to go through it and review the projects, and develop your own opinions. Now, I know a lot of things, if we tell you we need a sewer replaced or something like that, you're not going to have an opinion, and that's fine. But guys that work with sewers every day, they can tell us. But some of the other ones are a little more available to the council to have opinions about, certainly parks and recreation facilities, the community enhancement group, go through that. I've given you tonight also scorecards, and These scorecards cover every project that's in your draft document. The yellow boxes reflect what staff has selected as far as the priorities. You can see the yellow boxes are by years in there, and then when you have 2 or 3 projects in a single year, then the priority number is immediately to the left of those yellow boxes. Are it. What I want you to do is, as you're reading the various projects, keep your scorecard with you and just check off. If you have questions, need those responded to, we can do that at a workshop meeting. If you have comments about it, just kind of take your notes on those sheets so that when we come in on the 18th, we'll be ready to talk about it and we can kind of vote to see what kind of concurrence we have had in the past, changed priorities on a lot of projects through the result of the city council reviewing them, particularly Parks and Rec. We've had a new rec center out here that wasn't really considered in priorities until it came to the council and things like that. So go home, read it on the night that there's the basketball game. Just be ready. I don't expect you to understand everything about every project just because it's in my draft document here. But if you have questions, we'll answer questions. We will have all of the department heads here for that meeting. Did I get 5 minutes?
Nope, you're over by 2.
Good night.
Thank you, Jerry.
All right, thank you, Jerry. That brings us up to item D, reports.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. Items 1 through 7 on reports are your various boards and committees, draft minutes for their meetings in March. And then for the manager's report, I won't go through all these, but you have the budget workshop next Monday at 4 here in this room. And then the CIP workshop that we just talked about CIP will be the main topic of your April workshop on the 18th. And then our special event season is kicking off this month, so we have a lot of stuff coming up. I do want to thank Melissa for all her work on updating the comp plan. It was a brief presentation tonight, but she's spent months working with advisory boards and staff to go through all the stuff that we've been doing. And if you haven't been paying attention at home, we've been really busy as a city the last several years. So thank you, Melissa, for spearheading that effort. And I'd like for Bill Carroll to come up and very briefly talk about your water treatment plant and the conference last week.
Yes, I'll be very, very brief. So I just wanted to give a couple updates on a couple things. So last year, the water treatment plant won North Carolina's best tasting water at the North Carolina Rural Water Association rally they had. And we'll be going to that again this May. Hopefully we'll retain that title. I did want to say that last week we participated in the National Rural Water Taste Test. We did not win, unfortunately. The state of Illinois won, but we're not sure where we placed. But I did want to say and share with you all just how much work goes into our water treatment plant and how good our staff is. We have an excellent staff, very professional staff there, and they work very hard on this. And of course, they take great pride in being able to get that award in the first place from North Carolina. So if you see them around or you take a visit to the water treatment plant, please thank them for all their work and efforts. And the other quick thing was we did have our KBB cleanup weekend this past weekend. We had a great turnout. I think around 60 individuals came out to volunteer, including some of our council members. And we don't have a firm count on exactly the tonnage of waste we picked up, but it's looking like it's going to be close to almost a ton of litter we picked up. So just want to thank everybody for that. And of course, if you see any areas that need cleanup, just let me know and we'll hit it again this fall. Thanks.
Thanks, Bill. That's all that I have for you.
Okay, with that, we are at item E, other business. Alex, I'm going to begin to my right.
Yes, so I'll be quick, just two things. Yeah, no, I think it was a great cleanup event, Bill and everyone, and Judy, thanks for everyone being out there. I think we got a lot. Jim and I worked the rail line. And I think we did a pretty good job. I did, what? Yeah. I did want to just kind of briefly mention 2 weekends ago, I did attend the Mount Holly Chili Cook-Off, and it was a pretty interesting event. They were raising funds for their Greenway project. I think you would have to raise a lot, I'm sure, to get the Greenway done, particularly our Greenway. But we do have some
$2 million is a lot of chili.
we do have some minor projects and kind of things for our parks and stuff that could use that type of funding. So I did send a note to Adrian to see if we could look at doing something, maybe chili barbecue in the fall in Stowe Park. No, to my understanding, we used to do a barbecue through Vince Hill. But I think it'd be interesting to incorporate that into a citywide thing, raise money for some ancillary projects. So just wanted to say that. And again, thanks again to staff and everyone. So yeah, thank you.
Okay, I've got a few items. There's no reason to respond to these now. We can go ahead and talk about them in our workshop. One of the residents sent me a photograph. They had called in a pickup for waste on Wednesday. And she was outside and she sent me a photo. Her neighbor had not called it in. There was a pile of sticks and debris there. She said the truck just drove by. Now there's two things there. I know that we're talked about trying to train the public to call it in. I don't know so much we should be focused on training the public as much as just picking up the debris. I mean, if you're passing by and you see it, I mean, my position on would be go ahead and pick it up, particularly with the cost of gas right now. There's no reason to make multiple trips dependent on a phone call. I would like us to create a policy on that. I mean, if we see it, we pick it up. I mean, that's one item. Prior notice to residents when work is going to be done. Although we may have the legal right in the right of way to go ahead and perform the work, I think it's not a bad practice. On South Point Road, I know the crews had a lady come out who was very upset about it. We had a gentleman tonight come out. We just have to make sure, I think, it's just a courtesy, because I know if I see somebody digging in my front yard and I'm not aware of what's going on, I'm going to be out there saying, you know, what's going on? Why are you here? We may technically have the right to do it, which we do, but I think we ought to look at, are we obligated, because we are a small community, maybe to go ahead and give the residents a prior notice, just let them know, look, we're going to be out digging in your yard. As many of you know, Billy Joy passed away. He was a mayor here in this town for some 20 plus years, I believe. And I assume all of council, the city, I'd like to extend my condolences to the family. Ask everyone to keep them in their thoughts and prayers. I mean, Billy was iconic in this town, and he will be missed. Walmart. I've been going to Walmart a great deal with spring and doing a lot of work in my yard. What I have noticed, other than the potholes, tractor trailers sitting there, and I've been going back repeatedly during the week. I don't know if we have a policy or they allow it, but you've got tractor trailers, and I counted 6 or 7 parked there overnighting in the front parking area, just sitting there, not idling, not waiting for a load. It appeared to be unloaded, just taking up space, a lot of parking spots. When you combine the look of having all these tractor trailers and all these potholes and broken curbs, it's just not a good look for Belmont. I don't know that we can address it or have the authority to. Maybe it's worth mentioning to Walmart. Maybe you don't want to have all these tractor trailers and vehicles sitting in your front parking lot for extended periods. Airbnbs is something that we might need to look at. I was reading some articles about regulation of them. I know Rock Hill has stopped permitting them. This is becoming something that's becoming kind of prolific around the country. And I think it would just warrant us looking at what the best practices are for the city and dealing with these. Closing, I'm going to City Vision. I think Charlie's going. I know Martha has been in the past. I don't know that any of the rest of council has. If you can make the time for it, it's a really good event to network with other communities and see what they are doing. They are holding some of their breakout sessions. We'll be focusing on ARPA funding which is a topic that we're going to be talking about. So, I mean, it is a 2 or 3 day event, and it is hard to get away for that length of time, but if you have the opportunity, it's worthwhile. That's all I have.
Given the update on the card feeder facility, do we need to rescind that demolition ordinance?
They're yeah, we do.
All right, well, we should probably put that on the next agenda. Yeah. I just, I know there's a lot to, and Richard alluded to some aspects of the issue with the public comment as to the problem with the work on the property, and there's a lot more to the story, obviously, and I don't want to get into like the easement and whatever, but I did hear a couple things, other things that concern me in what he said, our resident. This is not the first time I've heard of these folks working on river mist, invoking the city's name and saying they either work for the city or they're, doing this under the auspices of the city. And, that's not necessarily the case. And that I find that concerning because it causes a lot of trouble, and it might, provide a false sense of false agency, if you will. By the same token, whoever said the city council gave them authority to remove the car by approving the river mist project, I think that's also, if that's what was said, that's also incorrect. And I want that to be clear that regardless of the approval of the river mist project, the only reason that that car could be removed was because there was an easement. And regardless of whether we, even if there was no easement, regardless of whether we approved river mist or not, they would not be able to go on the property with the car. It was the existence of the easement that allowed them to do that. It wasn't that city council sent them to go take the car away. So I just wanted to clear up a couple of those things. And I know there's a whole lot more to the story, but, combined with what Richard said and everything, I just want to make sure that we're looking into, taking appropriate action, protecting people's rights, and, from both sides, that we're respecting the residents' rights, but we're also respecting the rights of the people who have the easement. So I just, want to make sure that we do what's appropriate and with respect to everyone involved in their respective rights. It'd be good to have an update on Deaton Drive and any negotiations that might be going on there. I would like to commend Richard for doing an excellent job as running the meeting as Mayor Pro Tem in Charlie's absence, and hopefully Charlie will be feeling better soon. On just one more thing, regardless of the result of the game tonight, what was that? I remember watching it in January. Was that Wake Forest 98, North Carolina 77? Was that the final score?
I believe that was correct, sir.
For the record, how many national championships do the Tar Heels have? And
Well, it depends on whether you count the one that was in like the Cracker Jack box and the one that they said 60 years after.
okay, we'll just go with the last 10 years.
There is more to the story, and the only dirt moved was in the right-of-way, and some people have a real issue and don't understand right-of-way. In other words, there are a lot of times people have come into my right-of-way, and I would not like them to be there one time a grade, but there is more to the story, and they did not come anywhere except in the actual right-of-way, because I looked since it's in my neighborhood. Thank you to Shelley and Tiffany for the Smith Farms situation. I called. We're talking about watching things. They done no grading to meet the grade for the connection that we asked for, and I talked to Shelley, and she and Tiffany were already on it because we have a different person in charge, and so they were looking at that as the second or third phase, and they made it clear to them that will not happen because that connection is supposed to be made as part of the first setup. So thank you for that. Would you, as staff, look at what we need to look at with regard to fences? We have some that are very objectionable. In the 90s, when we did a traditional neighborhood development portion of our code, that was something was in there about fences. So I don't know what, I'll ask my husband again because he and I had this conversation because we need to look at that because we're having some issues. Parking as well, because I know Newbridge has asked for parking. The front of that house is on Central. The side parking, if they'll take and push the fence back, they should have adequate parking. We need to be very vigilant because we want to look at the streetscape. And also with regard to the middle school property, they have, of course, some to the side, but we're going to have to be really careful about how and what we allow parking. And so using permeable pavers and that kind of thing, so we keep that part of it. Keener Boulevard, we need to do some kind of designation so people realize why it's named that. Several residents have called that to my attention, so I don't know what we need to do. It was the first Vietnam death from this community. So that's something we need to be aware of as well. But that's it for me.
So I would just second Richard's comments about the short-term rentals. That's something I've gotten a lot of feedback on lately. I did do some independent research in our own existing code, and there does seem to be some stuff that could arguably be applied to them as written, especially since they seem to fall into that definition of lodging. And there's some parking requirements and that sort of thing tied to lodging in residential areas. But I think a more comprehensive look at this is very important, especially since they seem to be popping up everywhere now.
Proliferate.
Yes, proliferating. Yes. And, I think it's important for maintaining the integrity of our neighborhoods. Like if you buy into a neighborhood thinking it's one thing and then 2 years down the road you're surrounded by what's basically a bunch of small hotels, that's not a good feel. So I don't know if there's interest among the group. It sounds like there might be. And I personally would appreciate some, priority placed on it because I know it's something I'm hearing a lot about. So I don't know if it's reasonable to maybe have an initial recommendation by like June-ish. I know I'm being pushy, but okay, yeah. So that'd be great, and I'm happy to weigh in and help, as needed. I won't just throw something on you and disappear. So just let me know how I can help. And that's all I got.
All right, well, I think Jim can help with that contract.
That's true. I'll volunteer Jim.
Prior to making a motion to adjourn, I know we want to all get out of here, but I would just say, our mayor was in obvious pain. He had some back issues, so I appreciate everybody, keep him in your thoughts. I've wrestled with that once or twice, and it's no easy matter, so I hope that he gets over this quickly. With that said, I would call for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Do we have a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
We're adjourned.